Chapter 1870. Ji Tianxing stood motionless on the black dragon's back as he stared at the gigantic figure in the sky. Although his face was expressionless, his deep eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Without needing Ji Bai and Shohei's reminder, he knew that the gigantic figure was Tianju Peak. In fact, his familiarity with Tianju Peak far exceeded that of Ji Bai and Shohei. 1,000 years ago, he had traveled from west to east across the entire Shenwu continent, and had been in the world for more than 20 years. Along the way, he had challenged the powerhouses and top geniuses of various races and countries. He had won every battle without a single defeat. In the end, he had arrived at this vast mountain range. After searching for half a month, he had finally found the legendary backbone of the continent, the pillar that supported the heavens, Tianju Peak. Then, he had taken his few followers and occupied Tianju Peak, establishing a training ground and a sacred palace. Tianju Peak was isolated between heaven and earth. Although it was the highest peak and backbone of the entire continent, it could not gather the world's spiritual energy. Thus, he had used his ability to change the heavens and the earth, changing the layout of the 108 peaks around Tianju Peak. The 108 peaks formed a Big Dipper astral array and a Big Dipper spirit array. With Tianju Peak as the center, the area within 100,000 kilometers was enveloped by these two large arrays, forming a rarely seen sacred land of martial arts. Later, he had made a bold declaration that he would challenge all the martial saints in the world on Tianju Peak. In the next 20 years, the martial saints of various races had come to challenge him on the peak of Tianju Peak. Without a doubt, he had defeated all the martial saints who had come to challenge him, and his name had spread throughout the Shenwu continent. From then on, Kenshin's name had spread to every corner of the Shenwu continent, and he was revered by everyone. Every day, countless aspiring youths and martial artists from all over the world would rush to Tianju Peak to become Kenshin's disciple. Tianju Peak had become even more prosperous, and it had become one of the top sects in the world. Its power was second only to the three divine kingdoms. However, after he had left, the former prosperity had gradually withered away. Today, Tianju Peak had been reduced to a second-rate power and had been forgotten by the world. Ji Tianxing stood on the black dragon's back and looked at the gigantic figure that was getting closer and closer. Countless memories surfaced in his mind, and his mood became somewhat lonely and sorrowful. Ji Bai and Shohei saw that he was silent and sensed that his aura was rather bleak, so they both shut their mouths. However, neither of them could guess what Ji Tianxing was thinking. The two of them thought that Ji Tianxing was in a bad mood because he was worried about the pillar of Heaven's mountains. After 100 breaths of time, the black dragon flew to the vicinity of the pillar of Heaven's mountains and stopped 1,000 feet above the ground. As he got closer, Ji Tianxing could see more clearly. The pillar of Heaven's mountains in front of him was somewhat different from when he left back then. This giant mountain that covered an area of 1,000 miles and was tens of thousands of feet tall was no longer surrounded by spiritual energy like it used to be. Back then, there was a clear river at the foot of this giant mountain, like a belt of sparkling and translucent pearls. The entire mountain was shrouded in a thin layer of five-colored spiritual light. Even in the dark of night, the five-colored light would still flicker. Between the steep cliffs and the white sea of clouds, groups of spirit cranes would fly past from time to time, letting out crisp and high-pitched cries. At the peak of the mountain, there was a five-colored waterfall that contained spiritual energy pouring down from the cliff, like a rainbow hanging on the cliffs. Not only that, the almost straight cliffs were covered with vines and various small trees. Those very spiritual vines and small trees would bear fragrant and delicious spirit fruits, exuding a refreshing aroma of greenwood. In short, the pillar of Heaven's mountains in the past was like a paradise on earth, like a divine mountain where the gods lived. But now, the entire giant mountain was somewhat dark, losing the luster of spiritual energy as if it was covered with a layer of dust. On the bare cliffs, there were only a few vines and trees, exposing large patches of gray-brown rocks. The foot of the mountain was covered with withered yellow leaves, and even the river that coiled around the Pillar of Heaven's mountains had long been blocked by boulders and mud, turning into a lifeless pool. Seeing this scene, Tianxing immediately frowned, and a thought flashed through his mind. As long as the great formation of heavenly spirits and earthly fiends is still operating, the surrounding 100,000 miles is the holy land of martial arts, a paradise. But in this situation, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is so thin. Could it be that the two great formations that I set up back then have been destroyed? He had a bad premonition, and his face became increasingly cold. The black dragon carried him and flew upwards, passing through the sea of clouds at a moderate speed, flying towards the peak of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. The Pillar of Heaven's mountains was really too high, more than 20,000 feet above the ground. It was covered by the sea of clouds. The mountain that surpassed the sea of clouds was still 80,000 feet high, definitely the highest in the world. Standing in the sea of clouds and looking at the surroundings, one could see a very spectacular scene. Below everyone's feet was a white sea of clouds, and there was nothing in all directions. Only the Pillar of Heaven's mountains stood in the sea of clouds, its peak connected to the blue and flawless sky. In the process of flying upwards, Tianxing recalled some past events. Back then, I chose to set up a training ground here. Firstly, because this place is the pillar that supports the heavens, symbolizing the unique status of being alone and far away. Secondly, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains is 10,000 feet high. The mountain is straight and steep, and even ordinary birds can't reach the peak. Ordinary people want to learn from me, but they can't even reach the peak, so naturally they will retreat, avoiding the trouble of taking the test. Indeed, back then, Kenshin's name spread all over the world, and countless geniuses came to learn from him. But those who could reach the peak were all outstanding people of the same generation. Those who were able to pass the 3 tests were even more exceptional martial arts geniuses. Therefore, none of the disciples of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains were mediocre. Not long later, the black dragon flew to the peak of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains against the biting, cold wind. The peak of the mountain was an open space with a radius of 300 miles, and the terrain was quite flat. Actually, when Kenshin came here, the peak of the mountain was uneven and was full of jagged rocks. The height of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains was actually 10,300 feet. In Kenshin's view, 9 was the limit, and exceeding it was as bad as falling short. A height of 9,999 feet meant that it was unparalleled in the world, and was at the peak of martial arts. Therefore, with a sweep of his sword, he shaved off 4 feet of the mountain peak, turning it into a flat piece of land. In the middle of this piece of land, he built an ancient holy city. The holy city was not big, but there were 18 magnificent palaces and 36 magnificent houses. Around the ancient holy city, there were forests, herb gardens, mountain peaks, and so on, and there's also a beast garden for spiritual beasts. Back then, there were more than 1,000 disciples and odd job workers living in the holy city, as if they were immortals who were isolated from the world. How carefree and happy. This place was also the holy mountain closest to the sky, and one could reach out to touch the sky and pluck the stars. It was a most unique place. In Kenshin's heart, this was his favorite cultivation holy land, and even the god kingdoms of the 3 martial gods could not be compared to it. However, after 1,000 years. Chapter 1871. The forests, herb gardens, and mountain peaks around the holy city were all withered and bleak, without much vitality. Especially the spirit beast garden in the east, there were many rare and precious spirit beasts. Not only were there groups of spirit cranes, there were also heavenly horses. But now, in the huge spirit beast garden, there were only a few spirit beasts. The gate and walls of the spirit beast garden were dilapidated, with broken bricks everywhere, and the ground was full of holes. The situation of the herb garden in the west of the holy city was not much better. The large formation that protected the herb garden had already disappeared, leaving only a few scattered small formations that were still flickering with a weak light. Most of the flower beds and herb gardens had turned into a grayish-brown wasteland, with many holes and ravines on the ground. Only a few innermost herb gardens were still planted with some herbs and spirit flowers. In short, Tianxing stood on top of the mountain peak and looked around, only to see a scene of decay and withering. He could not believe that this gloomy, dilapidated, and gray holy city was the holy land of martial arts that he had opened back then. Bai and Shohei had been standing behind Tianxing, deeply feeling the change in his mood. Their mood was also somewhat heavy. With a gloomy face, they explained, "Master, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains was definitely not like this in the past. This place was a top holy land of martial arts 1,000 years ago. It's just in the past 1,000 years, many forces have been secretly plotting against us, causing our sect's power to continuously weaken, resulting in today's situation." Bai and Shohei knew that the current situation of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains was really worrying. It had already reached a critical point. The two of them were absolutely loyal to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Naturally, they would not despise it, let alone have any thoughts of betrayal. However, some disciples with weak willpower had already started to escape. Therefore, when the two of them saw Tianxing's grave expression, they were worried that Tianxing would despise the decline of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Tianxing did not say anything. He rode the black dragon over the forest and landed in the holy city. The layout of the holy city was rather peculiar. It was circular and sat on top of the mountain. The outer circle was 36 ancient houses, and the inner circle was 18 imposing palaces. In the middle of the holy city was a dojo with a radius of 100 miles. It was surrounded by many palaces and mansions. The huge dojo was paved with dozens of different kinds of stones, all of which were extraordinarily effective spirit stones and gemstones. The ground was dark green in color and was engraved with patterns and patterns of great formations. This formation with a radius of 100 miles was created by Kenshin and was known as the Firmament Formation. The Heavenly Dome Formation was the core of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. It had 81 transformations and could transform into all sorts of formations with extraordinary effects. In the middle of the dojo stood a black stone tablet that was thousands of feet tall. It was like a giant sword that stood between heaven and earth. Without a doubt, the towering black sword stele was based on the Sword of Burial of Heaven. It was also the totem of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Under the huge sword stele was a pedestal with a radius of 1,000 feet. There were many patterns and seal characters engraved on it. The lines of bold and powerful characters were also written by Kenshin. They were about the righteousness of the way of the sword and the rules of Tianzhu Mountain. Even after thousands of years, the black sword stele was still intact. It added a sense of vicissitudes to it. The black dragon landed on the dojo. Tianxing looked at the sword stele. After looking at it for a while, his expression became much gentler. No matter how much the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains declined, no matter how disappointing the disciples were, the sword stele was still intact. At the very least, the dojo and the sword stele had been preserved, which was a blessing in disguise. Tianxing stood under the sword stele and stared at the pedestal with a complicated gaze. He looked at the patterns and words on the black stone wall. The lines of bold and powerful characters emitted an unparalleled, domineering aura and sword intent. Even after thousands of years, the ancient characters seemed to have come alive. They made people not dare to look at them directly. They were filled with reverence. As a master, I will not hide anything. I will not hesitate to die for my disciple. Only then can I have a long history. These words came from Kenshin. They were written before the rules of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. It was the general outline of the 36 rules of the sect. 1,000 years ago, the martial masters and disciples of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains always remembered these words and engraved them in their hearts. Therefore, 1,000 years ago, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains was known as the #1 sect under the heavens. Tianxing silently recited the general outline of the sect rules. His gaze gradually moved up and looked at the sky along the sword steel. Suddenly, he raised his head and laughed. Ha ha! The endless river flows to the east. The waves wash away the heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure vanish in the blink of an eye. The holy mountain is still here. The sunset is still red. The white-haired fisherman and woodcutter on the river, accustomed to the autumn moon and spring breeze, meet again with a pot of turbid wine. How many things have happened in the past and the present? Ji Tianxing opened his arms and laughed wildly. His tone contained a strong sense of desolation and carefreeness. The black dragon, Ji Bai and Shohei, looked at his back with complicated expressions. They felt the endless sense of desolation, and their hearts became heavy. The burial of heaven also flew out from Ji Tianxing's body and turned into a black stream of light. With a shio sound, it drilled into the huge sword steel. Suddenly, the 1,000-feet-tall ancient sword steel seemed to come alive. It emitted a dazzling cold light and let out a sword cry that pierced through the clouds. Ji Tianxing waved his big sleeve and stood proudly under the sword steel. His long hair fluttered in the wind as he shouted with a solemn expression. The sea turns into mulberry fields. The stars move. The divine splendor of the past is gone. But I have returned from reincarnation. 3,000 disciples bring peace to the world. 100,000 divine swords suppress the heavens. Along with the vigorous sound waves, a vast and mighty, formless aura swept out like a gale and engulfed the entire dojo. The 10,000 feet tall pillar of heaven's mountains, as if it had a soul, obeyed his command and yielded to his pressure. It actually shook 3 times. At this time, a white-haired Taoist wearing an apricot yellow Taoist robe and holding a golden horsetail whisk rushed over with a few elders in purple robes. When everyone stepped onto the dojo, they saw Ji Tianxing, the Black Dragon, Ji Bai, and Shohei. They also heard Ji Tianxing's desolate laughter, especially the last few words. It was like thunder piercing their ears, deafening their ears. The white-haired Taoist body suddenly trembled. His footsteps stiffened and he froze on the spot. An incomparably shocked expression appeared on his old face. His eyes widened as if he saw the most inconceivable thing in the world. He was so excited that his whole body trembled. Master. The white-haired Taoist was so excited that his beard trembled. He muttered to himself. His old eyes were red and wet. His legs went soft, and he almost knelt down to pay his respects. The few elders in purple robes were still confused. They only saw the white-haired Taoist's expression change and did not know what was going on. One of the elders angrily glared at Ji Tianxing under the sword steel. He even shouted with a dignified tone, "Who is making a racket here? How dare you be rude to our sect's sacred sword?" As soon as he finished speaking, the white-haired Taoist suddenly turned his head and glared at him fiercely. He angrily shouted, "Bastard! Shut up for this old man." Chapter 1872. The few elders were puzzled. They did not understand why the white-haired Taoist had such an intense reaction. The sword steel in the middle of the training field was the sacred sword totem of the pillar of heaven's mountains. It had a sacred meaning. That unfamiliar white-robed youth was actually shouting insolently under the holy sword. This was simply too disrespectful. Even the few elders saw Ji Bai and Shohei following behind the white-robed youth. Everyone could guess that the white-robed youth could be the successor of Kenshin. But in everyone's opinion, since he was the successor of Kenshin, he should be respectful towards Kenshin and the sacred sword. But the white-haired Taoist was the leader of the pillar of heaven's mountains. Even he did not get angry, nor did he scold the white-robed youth. Instead, he showed a protective attitude. This made everyone even more puzzled. Why would the yellow dragon immortal have such a reaction? Just as the few elders were bewildered and secretly puzzled, the white-haired Taoist quickly rushed to the center of the training field. His expression was very complicated. He was full of anticipation, but also a little uneasy. His eyes stared at the white-robed figure. In a short 10 breaths, everyone arrived under the 1,000 feet tall sword steel. Ji Bai and Shohei came back to their senses and quickly greeted everyone. "Greetings, great immortal and elders." The two of them respectfully bowed and then stood at the side, waiting for orders. Ji Tianxing's emotions gradually calmed down. He turned to look at the white-haired Taoist and the few elders. When he and the white-haired Taoist looked at each other, their pupils shrank, their eyes flashed with a touch of splendor. Especially the white-haired Taoist, his body trembled, his eyes widened, and he let out a low roar in his heart. "It's him. It's really him. It's definitely Master. That appearance, that aura, that gaze, it's definitely the same." The few elders had joined the Pillar of Heaven's mountains later. They had not seen the original body of Kenshin. But the white-haired Taoist was Kenshin's follower and guard-come disciple. He was very familiar with everything about Kenshin. Even after 1,000 years, he could still clearly remember Kenshin's gaze, aura, and every move. At this moment, the white-haired Taoist's old eyes welled up with hot tears. He could no longer hold back the excitement and sorrow in his heart. He bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. Unfilial disciple Huang Long greets Master. Ever since the Sword God left the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, Huang Long had been missing his master for the past 1,000 years. Especially after the news of the Sword God's death spread, Huang Long was even more devastated. However, he remembered his master's teachings and shouldered the heavy responsibility of protecting the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. No matter how much pain he felt, he had always persevered. No one knew how many hardships and sufferings he had endured in the past 1,000 years. No one knew how big of a blow the news of the Sword God's death was to him. Now that Taoist and Taoist was the heavens and earth, and Taoist not feel the heavens and earth. The yearning and remembrance that had lasted for 1,000 years had caused his state of mind to completely fall apart. At this moment, he felt as if he had returned to 1,500 years ago, when he first climbed the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and became Kenshin's disciple. That was why he performed a disciple salute in front of everyone. His deep bow contained too many emotions. Other than himself, only Ji Tianxing could understand it. Jibai and Shohei were dumbfounded. They stared at the Huanglong Taoist, their eyes full of shock. The 5 elders were also stunned. They stared at the Huanglong Taoist and couldn't help but exclaim, "Great Immortal, what are you doing? Great Immortal, please get up. You got the wrong person. That's Kenshin's successor." The elders reminded the Huanglong Taoist. 2 elders even reached out to help him up. However, the Huanglong Taoist was a martial saint. He didn't move at all and maintained his bowing posture. Who could help him up? Ji Tianxing also looked at him with a complicated gaze. He looked at his old and white Taoist robe, his white hair that reached his waist, and his aged face. His heart was heavy and filled with emotion. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and suppressed his complicated emotions. He smiled and said, "Huang Long, we haven't seen each other for 1,000 years. How's your cultivation of the Imperial Sword Sutra? Master didn't personally guide you. You're not slacking off again, are you?" Ji Tianxing's voice was gentle and calm, but there was a sense of pressure. When the Huanglong Taoist heard this familiar voice, his body trembled. He couldn't help but burst into tears. 1,500 years ago, when he was cultivating with Kenshin, he often had to wait for a long time to see Kenshin. Every time he saw Kenshin, Kenshin would ask him about his cultivation. Especially in the last 20 years, Kenshin would ask him about his cultivation of the Imperial Sword Sutra every time. However, the Imperial Sword Sutra was an incomparably profound sword technique. His cultivation progress was very slow. When he met Kenshin, he was scared witless. He was afraid of being scolded by Kenshin and even more afraid of disappointing Kenshin. Since Kenshin left, he thought that he would never hear these words again in his life. However, he had never imagined that after 1,000 years, he would once again hear those familiar words. Moreover, they were exactly the same as before. He raised his sleeve to wipe away the tears on his old face. He replied with a trembling voice, "Master, disciple has already comprehended the first 7 levels of the Imperial Sword Sutra. Now I have reached the 8th level. Ji Tianxing showed a gratified smile and nodded. Not bad. The 7th level is the biggest threshold. Once you enter the 8th level, you can hide your sword in the void and travel 1,000 miles. The two of them, one old and one young, were like master and disciple, conversing with each other in a serious manner. The 5 elders, Ji Bai and Shohei, had long been at a loss. They were all speechless and stunned on the spot. Everyone's expression and eyes were very strange, but no one dared to speak and interrupt this strange scene in front of them. The elders looked at each other and shook their heads. They were in grief as they discussed with each other. Sai, the pitiful great immortal, misses the martial ancestor too much. He actually treated that person as the martial ancestor. Crazy. They're all crazy. The great immortal has become muddle-headed. Even that kid has gone crazy. We can't let them go on like this. If the disciples of the sect see this, what will happen? Yes, the great immortal is the only remaining martial saint in the Pillar of Heaven's mountain. He is also our teacher. We can't let him be humiliated and teased like this. That kid is the martial ancestor's successor in vain. He is actually so rude. It is too disappointing. Just as the elders were secretly discussing, Ji Tianxing had already raised his hand and helped Huanglong Daoist up. Huanglong Daoist looked up at his face. His old face was filled with excitement and respect. Ji Tianxing looked at him kindly and said with a smile, "All right, now that you're a 1,000-year-old monster who has become an immortal, how can you lose your bearing? Don't let the juniors see you as a joke. No matter what the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountain is today, since I have returned, I will purge the enemy and restore the glory of the sect." Huanglong Daoist nodded and said with a firm tone, "Huanglong has long known and always believed that a godly person like Master will never fall. You are destined to move unhindered in the universe and be the only one in the world." Chapter 1873. In the entire Tianju Mountain, the Huanglong Daoist was the one who understood Kenshin the most. It was because he understood Kenshin the most that he was unable to accept the fact that Kenshin had already fallen. For the past 1,000 years, he had been pondering, how could an unparalleled god like Kenshin fall? He had also been fantasizing that perhaps on a certain morning, that peerless figure in a white robe would descend from the sky and descend upon Tianju Mountain once again. 100 or 200 years ago, the Huanglong Daoist had once revealed this idea. As a result, many elders and deacons felt that the great immortal had become muddle-headed. He actually had such a ridiculous imagination and hallucination. After the news spread, the disciples of Tianju Mountain were all discussing this matter in private. In everyone's eyes, the great immortal had also become a crazy old immortal. Seeing everyone's reaction, the Huanglong Daoist no longer expressed similar thoughts. After a few decades, everyone gradually forgot about this matter. However, the few elders did not expect that now that Kenshin's successor had arrived, the great immortal's old habits had resurfaced. Everyone looked at the great elder and secretly transmitted their voices. "Great elder, quickly make a decision." The great elder, Niet Tianchun, was a tall and sturdy white-haired elder. His square face was bronze-colored, and he looked very upright and dignified. He frowned and ordered in a deep voice, "Feng Ping, Lang Jing, the two of you bring the great immortal back and comfort him. This brat who doesn't know etiquette, I will personally teach him a lesson." The fourth elder, Feng Ping, had once gone to the divine kingdom of Taihao and had a face-to-face conversation with Ji Tianxing. He had a good impression of Ji Tianxing. He had never expected that Ji Tianxing's first visit to Tianju Mountain would cause such a huge disturbance. After receiving the great elder's order, Feng Ping and Lang Jing looked at each other and walked to the Huanglong Daoist side. The two of them did not care that the Huanglong Daoist was talking. They supported him on both sides and dragged him away. "Great Immortal, this is not the place to talk. I will bring you to the main hall." "Great Immortal, please come to the main hall. This disciple has already ordered people to prepare the spirit tea." The Huanglong Daoist frowned and glared at Feng Ping and Lang Jing. With a stern tone, he shouted, "What are you two doing? This old man has just met with Master. How dare you obstruct me?" You two little bastards, quickly release this old man. But the more he struggled, the more certain Feng Ping and Lang Jing were that he was crazy. Without any explanation, they dragged him and turned to walk towards the conference hall. At the same time, Grand Elder Nie Tianxun led the second elder and third elder to Ji Tianxing, their faces filled with rage. Brat, you're the lucky one who obtained Grandmaster's inheritance? Nie Tianxun stared sternly at Ji Tianxing and said in a deep voice, We've heard about you a long time ago, but due to the current situation, we didn't summon you. I didn't expect you to be so ignorant and impolite. You've just arrived at Tianju Mountain, and you haven't even paid your respects to Great Immortal and Grandmaster. Yet you pretended to be Grandmaster and teased Great Immortal. How should you be punished? As he spoke, Nie Tianxun released an invisible pressure from his body and pressed down on Ji Tianxing. The second elder and third elder stood on his left and right. They also glared at Ji Tianxing and released a strong sense of pressure. However, Ji Tianxing stood there with an indifferent expression. He looked at the three of them calmly, without the slightest regret or fear. The pressure of the three elders had no effect on him at all. Seeing that the situation was not good, Ji Bai and Shohei quickly knelt down beside Ji Tianxing and pleaded with Nie Tianxun. Grand Elder, please calm down. Young Master Ji is new here and doesn't know the rules of her sect. Grand Elder, please forgive young Master Ji. Before they finished speaking, Ji Tianxing released an invisible force and lifted them up, straightening their backs. Ji Bai, Shohei, this has nothing to do with you two. Just follow behind me. Ji Tianxing said with an indifferent expression. He walked past the three elders and walked towards the meeting hall. Ji Bai and Shohei froze for a moment. They didn't dare to follow Ji Tianxing, but they were supported by an invisible belief and hurriedly followed. The three elders were actually ignored by Ji Tianxing. The three of them became even angrier. Nie Tianxun suddenly turned around and glared at Ji Tianxing's back. He shouted angrily, Stop, you little brat. How dare you be so arrogant? The second elder and third elder also opened their mouths and sternly reprimanded Ji Tianxing for being arrogant and rude. Ji Tianxing stopped, and with his back facing the three elders, he said indifferently, The three of you have offended Grandmaster, which is already disgraceful. Considering that you were young and entered the sect late and didn't know, I will not argue with you and forgive your crimes. But this is the last time. If you do it again, you will be punished according to the sect rules. A deep and forceful voice reverberated in the dojo, emitting a shocking pressure. When his voice fell, Ji Tianxing walked away and walked towards the meeting hall without looking back. The three elders stood in the same place and were stunned for a long time before they came back to their senses. Recalling Ji Tianxing's words, the three of them were so angry that they laughed. Ha ha ha! We offended Grandmaster? This brat is really crazy. Does he really think that he is our sect's Grandmaster? Because we are young and entered the sect late? This is ridiculous. Despicable brat. How dare he tease us like this? I will not let him off easily. The three of them shouted angrily and hurriedly chased after Ji Tianxing. They wanted to take him down on the spot and punish him severely. But at this moment, the sword steel in the middle of the training hall suddenly lit up with a sacred golden light, releasing an invisible divine power that suppressed heaven and earth. Swoosh! The invisible divine power descended from the sky and instantly suppressed the three elders. Suddenly, the three of them could not bear the divine power of heaven and earth and were immediately forced to kneel on the ground in a row. The three of them were terrified and looked at the sword steel in disbelief. Then they looked at Ji Tianxing's back. The sacred sword has shown its spirit? How is this possible? This has never happened before. What's going on? The sacred sword has released a mighty divine power to punish us? How can this be? Could it be that the brat and Grandmaster, just as the three of them were discussing in shock, the invisible divine power suppressed them again and forced them to kneel on the ground? No matter how you looked at it, the three of them were kneeling on the ground and respectfully watching Ji Tianxing leave. As a result, The three elders' expressions were even more terrified, and their hearts were in turmoil. Oh my God! After 1,000 years, the sacred sword has shown its spirit? It's over, it's over. The sacred sword is our sex totem. It can't be wrong. It seems that we have really offended Grandmaster. Great Immortal knows Grandmaster the best. He can't be wrong. That white-robed young man. Could he be Grandmaster's reincarnation? The three elders looked at each other and discussed uncontrollably. Could it be that we are wrong? If so, we have offended Grandmaster. This is treason, and we will be expelled from the sect. He said just now that we did not know. He will spare us this time. If we do it again, we will be punished according to the sect rules. Chapter 1874. A moment later, the sword steel retracted its invisible pressure. The three elders heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. After the incident just now, the anger of the three elders had dissipated. Instead, they were filled with awe and doubt. After exchanging a glance with each other, Netian-chun rose to his feet and led the two elders toward the conference hall. In the north of the training hall, there was an ancient bronze palace that covered an area of thousands of feet. The roof of the palace was covered with golden glazed tiles. They used to be dazzling, but now they were gray and dim. This ancient bronze palace was the most majestic palace in the Pillar of Heaven Mountain. It was called the Pillar of Heaven Palace. More than 1,000 years ago, the main hall was the meeting hall of the sect. The backyard was the bedroom of the founder, Kenshin. The current Pillar of Heaven Palace was no longer as sacred and majestic as it used to be. The steps and pillars in front of the main hall were also covered with mottled patterns. When the three elders entered the main hall, they saw Huanglong Daoist and Ji Bai Shohei standing in the middle of the hall with respectful postures. The fourth elder Feng Ping and the fifth elder Lang Jing stood in the corner of the hall, quietly observing. Ji Tianxing stood at the head of the table, silently looking at the high platform, bronze throne, and stone wall. On the platform with a radius of 100 feet, there was a large bronze throne that had not been sat on for more than 1,000 years. That was Kenshin's exclusive throne. Ever since he left, Huanglong Daoist had not sat on it. During the meetings, Huanglong Daoist only dared to sit on the left side of the table. In his heart, his master, Kenshin, would always be supreme. At this moment, Ji Tianxing returned to the old place. Standing in front of the bronze throne, he looked up at the stone wall behind the throne and sighed with emotion. There was a painting on the stone wall. There were 2 lines of words written in bold strokes. In the painting was a young man standing alone on top of the clouds. His left hand pointed to the sky, and his right hand held a sword pointing to the ground. Although the painting was not very clear, he could still see that the godlike young man was quite similar to him. He stretched out his hand to caress the bronze throne and slowly paced around it. On the right side of the throne, there was a bronze stone platform with a dark green vine on it. Even after 1,000 years, the 3 feet long vine still contained a boundless vitality. Its skin was still fresh, and there were even signs of sprouting. This vine was no ordinary item. It was an ancient vine that he had plucked from the longevity sea, and he named it the longevity vine. More than 1,000 years ago, when he taught his disciples, he never used the sword of burial of heaven. He always used the longevity vine instead of the holy sword to demonstrate the profound meaning of the sword art. In addition, the longevity vine had another function, and that was to punish disciples. He would use the longevity vine to punish anyone who violated the sect's rules or was punished for other reasons. When the longevity vine whipped his body, the pain would seep into his bones, leaving a deep impression on him. However, it would not leave behind any scars. The power of immortality contained within could heal all kinds of injuries and pain. Not only had the Huanglong Daoist been whipped by the longevity vine, but so had the white dragon god and the chess saint, Xia Wudao. Ji Tianxing reached out and picked up the longevity vine, rubbing it with his palm. The longevity vine was also intelligent. It sensed his aura and lit up with a dense green light. In just a few breaths, 2 tiny sprouts sprouted from the dark green surface of the vine. Seeing this, the Huanglong Daoist was even more excited. His eyes shone brightly. Upon seeing this, Nie Tianxian and the two elders' expressions flickered drastically as they began to discuss among themselves via voice transmission. He actually picked up the longevity vine and made it sprout. Oh my God, are our eyes playing tricks on us? This is definitely a miracle. For more than 1,000 years, no one other than the great deity could pick up the holy vine. Our Grandmaster has really shown up. The three of them were shocked, but they did not dare to make a sound. They walked quietly to the Huanglong Taoist and stared at Ji Tianxing with shining eyes. After a long time, Ji Tianxing stopped reminiscing and put the longevity vine back on the bronze lampstand. He swung his loose white robe and sat calmly on the bronze throne. In that instant, the dim bronze throne actually lit up with a layer of hazy green light. The hall, which was originally dark and gloomy, became as bright as day. What was more amazing was that hundreds of ancient lamps on the walls of the hall that had been extinguished for thousands of years were reignited. Above the dome of the main hall, tens of thousands of light spots lit up. There were more than 90,000 gemstones, all shining with a dense white light. They gathered to form a huge star map, as if the sky was filled with stars. The bright starlight shone down and illuminated the entire hall, making it look like a dream. Everyone felt as if they were in the starry sky, and the sun, moon, and stars were within reach. Huanglong Taoist and Ji Bai and Shohei were amazed, and their eyes were filled with excitement and worship. The three elders were also stunned. They looked up at the vast star map, and their hearts were filled with shock. Ji Tianxing's reaction was the calmest. He only glanced at the star map and then withdrew his gaze. After all, the star map was personally arranged by him. The structure of the star map, the order and position of the 90,000 gemstones, he knew it like the back of his hand. At this moment, he was sitting on the bronze throne, bathing in the bright starlight. His body was emitting a faint divine light like a real god. Huanglong Taoist immediately knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully. He solemnly shouted, "Welcome back to Tianju Mountain, Master." Ji Bai and Shohei were stunned for a moment, and quickly knelt down and shouted respectfully, "Welcome back, Grandmaster." The three elders were suddenly embarrassed. They stood there with complicated expressions and were somewhat at a loss. Huanglong Taoist had already knelt down, and if the three of them didn't kneel, it would be rude. However, they were still observing Ji Tianxing, and were not sure if he was Kenshin. It was even more difficult for them to accept this unbelievable result. For them to kneel to a young man in his 20s and respectfully call him Grandmaster, it was too difficult. Just as the three of them were hesitating, Huanglong Taoist turned his head and stared at them with a dignified gaze. He shouted in a low voice, "Unfilial disciples, hurry up and kneel." Second elder and third elder's hearts trembled. They braced themselves and knelt down. Only great elder Nie Tianxian did not kneel. He hesitated for a moment, and then he gathered his courage and made up his mind. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a solemn expression and asked, "Young Master Ji, please forgive me for not being able to accept this result. As everyone knows, our sect's Grandmaster Kenshin fell 1,000 years ago. Now, after 1,000 years, you suddenly appeared. Even if you look similar to our Grandmaster, you can't be our sect's Grandmaster. Please give me a reasonable explanation." Second elder, third elder, Feng Ping, and Lang Jing all had the same thought. They still felt that it was a dream. Hearing Nie Tianxin's question, the four of them quickly echoed, "Yes, I hope young Master Ji can explain clearly. This kind of mysterious thing only exists in myths and legends. How can it be true?" Chapter 1875. Ji Tianxing also understood that it was almost impossible for the five elders to accept such a ridiculous thing in such a short time. However, these five elders were very important. They were the mainstays of Tianju Mountain. Although the Huanglong Taoist was in charge, the five elders were still in charge of all the affairs of Tianju Mountain. If he could not convince them, he would not be able to control the situation of Tianju Mountain. No matter what plan he had, it would be difficult to implement it. The Huanglong Taoist also understood this, so he was very anxious. He glared at the 5 elders angrily and shouted in a dignified tone, "What are you doing? Are you trying to force me to abdicate or rebel? I am Master's eldest disciple, so I know him the best. Regardless of whether you believe it or not, this old man can guarantee with his life that this person in front of you is the Sword God, the founder of our pillar of heaven's mountains. Master once ascended to the upper realm and became the divine king who controlled the gods. How could he have fallen? Now that Master has reincarnated and returned to Tianzhu Mountain, he will lead everyone to rise again. How dare you treat our founder like this? What are your intentions?" The Huanglong Taoist was really angry. An invisible pressure burst out from his body and suppressed the 5 elders. The 5 elders were intimidated by his dignified aura. They showed a respectful expression and lowered their heads. However, they refused to back down and swore to get to the bottom of this matter. Niet Tianxian cupped his hands and said to the Huanglong Taoist, "Great immortal, we are also willing to believe that this young Master Ji is our founder and that he can lead everyone to glory again. But how can we believe such an unimaginable thing? You are our teacher, so we naturally don't dare to offend you. However, we just want to know the truth and the reason. Otherwise, how can we be at ease?" "You, Niet Tianxian." The Huanglong Taoist frowned and was about to reprimand him. At this moment, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and interrupted the Huanglong Taoist. "Huanglong, don't be angry. Let me handle this matter. It happened too suddenly, and it's too bizarre. It's normal for them to be unable to accept it for a while." After he finished speaking, he looked at the 5 elders with a dignified gaze and asked in a calm tone, "Everyone, the pillar of heaven's mountains has fallen to such a state today and is in imminent danger. For the 5 of you to stay and fight alongside Huanglong until now, it can be seen that you are loyal and devoted to our sect. Since that's the case, I won't hide it from you. Just as Huanglong said, I've reincarnated, so my strength is still gradually recovering. This kind of thing that only exists in myths and legends is unattainable to you, but it's nothing to me. If you want to verify my identity, it's actually very simple. All you need to do is ask about something that only Kenshin knows about, and you'll be able to answer the questions in your hearts." Upon hearing these words, Niet Tianxian and the 4 elders' expressions softened significantly. Niet Tianxian pondered for a moment before saying, "Young Master Ji, there's a history book in our sect that records everything from the founding of our sect to his ascension. I hope that young Master Ji will consider my next question carefully before answering." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. Niet Tianxian's expression was solemn as he asked, "Young Master Ji, may I ask when our sect's founding ancestor first arrived at the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains? How many people were with him at that time?" Ji Tianxing answered without hesitation, "It was 1,546 years ago. There were 4 people with him, including Huanglong." Niet Tianxian's expression did not change as he continued to ask, "When was our sect's dojo built? What's the name of the formation in the dojo? How many transformations are there? Also, there are 108 mountains within 100,000 miles of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. What kind of formation do they form?" Ji Tianxing did not hesitate at all as he said in a calm voice, 1,546 years ago, during the fall of the leaves, I came to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains and decided to build a dojo here and establish a sect. In just 36 days, my 4 followers and I built 18 palaces and 36 courtyards. When it was snowing, I built the dojo on my own and laid down the heavenly dome formation that contained 99 transformations to suppress the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. After that, I used the ability to change heaven and earth and move the surrounding mountains. With the 108 mountains, I formed the Heavenly Dipper Star Formation and the Earth Fiend Spirit Praying Formation. In the spring of the next year, I challenged all the martial saints in the world. In the following 20 years, a total of 49 martial saints came to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains one after another and competed with me on the dojo. Ji Tianxing's tone was very firm and clear. It was as if he had personally experienced those scenes, and it was very vivid. Huanglong Taoist was silent as his eyes were filled with memories. Ji Bai and Shohei were shocked as they looked at Ji Tianxing with complicated expressions. Their eyes were filled with worship. The expressions of the elders also changed. They looked at each other and secretly discussed. Every word that he said matches the records in the history books without the slightest discrepancy. I'm beginning to believe that he is the reincarnation of our ancestor. If that's not the case, it doesn't make sense. There really is such a miracle in the world. Our ancestor has reincarnated and returned. The heavens are really blessing our sect. The elders all believed Ji Tianxing's words. Nie Tianxin still did not express his opinion. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a firm gaze and continued. Our ancestor's life story is widely spread throughout the Xinwu continent, and everyone knows about it. If someone is diligent enough, they can spend a lot of time and effort investigating the clues, and they can easily answer the questions. Thus, it's not enough for Sir Ji to just answer these questions. May I ask, in which year did our ancestor challenge the four ultimates martial saints? Ji Tianxing expressionlessly replied, it was in the summer of the 11th year after our sect was founded. Nie Tianxin asked again, in the 12th year, our ancestor defeated the Flame Spirit Tribe's martial saint in 2 moves, and not long after, he defeated the Grand Spring Nation's Holy Emperor with a single sword strike. Is that correct? Wrong, Ji Tianxing said in a low voice. In the 12th year, only the Flame Spirit Tribe's martial saint came to challenge us, and I defeated him in 1 move. I defeated the Grand Spring Nation's Holy Emperor in the autumn of the following year. I did not even use my sword. Instead, I forced him to retreat with a single punch. When they heard this, the 4 elders' eyes lit up, and they were filled with joy and excitement. This is unbelievable. He actually answered such a tricky question correctly. These matters are extremely secretive, and only our sect's history books have detailed records of them. He really is our ancestor's reincarnation. However, Nie Tianxin was not done with his questioning, and he solemnly said, Sir Ji, you still need to answer the last and most important question. Before our ancestor ascended, he left behind the Astral Sword Manual. What kinds of techniques does it contain? Our sect is the holy land closest to the heavens, and it hides a huge secret. After our ancestor ascended, countless powers coveted our sect's shocking secret, and they all attacked and persecuted us. Sir Ji, may I ask where this shocking secret is hidden? Ji Tianxing coldly replied, the Astral Sword Manual has a total of 5 secret techniques. They're the Sword Manipulation Sutra, the 9 Swords of the Burial of Heaven, the Sky Dragon's 7 Steps, the Heavenly Spirit Body, Refining Art, and the Myriad Sword Array. As for where this shocking secret is hidden, only the sect masters of each generation are qualified to know. Now, Huanglong is still the sect master of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Other than me, only he knows about it. At this point, he stared sharply at Nie Tianxin, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. He said in a cold voice, you're only an elder of our sect, and you're not qualified to know this question. You're deliberately questioning me with this secret. If you're not stupid, then you're evil. As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful and invisible pressure burst out from his body, and it pressed down on Nie Tianxin like a mountain. Nie Tianxin's expression changed immediately, and a look of fear and trepidation appeared on his face. He quickly knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully. Chapter 1876. An invisible divine power suppressed Nie Tianxin. He prostrated himself on the ground and kowtowed respectfully. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. The invisible pressure made him panic, as if he felt that death was approaching. His body became cold and stiff. The 4 elders standing behind him were also pale with fright. They all knelt on the ground and kowtowed respectfully. Unfilial disciple welcomes the return of the Grand Master. The 5 elders knelt down, and Jibai and Shohei also hurriedly knelt down. That domineering and unparalleled divine power filled the hall, making the 2 of them anxious and afraid to breathe. Only Huanglong Taoist was still standing. His back was straight, his face was red, and his eyes were full of pride. He stared at Ji Tianxing, as if he was looking at his master Kenshin. His thoughts also returned to more than 1,500 years ago. Ji Tianxing sat on the bronze throne and looked down at Nye Tianxin and the others. Although the 5 elders believed him and accepted his identity, this was not the end. However, this was not the end. It was a new beginning. He stretched out his left hand, and the longevity vine on the lampstand next to the throne flew up and landed in his palm. He held the longevity vine in his hand and pointed at Nye Tianxin, who was lying on the ground, and said in a dignified tone, "Nye Tianxin, although I have just returned today and don't know the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, I still don't know the situation. However, what you have done today has crossed the line again, and even touched the taboo of our sect. Since this is your first offense, I will be lenient. I hope you will remember it in your heart." After saying that, he waved his left hand, and the longevity vine turned into a ray of green light and flew into Huanglong Daoist's hand. "Huanglong, carry out 20 whippings." Huanglong Daoist held the longevity vine with both hands and was stunned. "Master, are you really going to let me carry out the punishment? Aren't you going to do it yourself, as a warning to others?" Huanglong Daoist knew that his master was reincarnated as Ji Tianxing. A young man in his 20s was too young. His master had just returned to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, and the elders were not convinced. His master could use this opportunity to show his power and intimidate the elders. However, he did not expect that his master would not do it and let him carry out the punishment. Thinking of this, he could not help but think, Master's strength is too weak now, and he is afraid that he will show his cowardice? Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "Nye Tianxin is your disciple. Of course, you should discipline him. He is not qualified for me to carry out the punishment." Huanglong hurriedly nodded his head to express his understanding. He said solemnly, "I understand." With these words, he held the longevity vine with both hands and walked to Nye Tianxin's side. Suppressed by the invisible divine might, Nye Tianxin was still sprawled on the ground, unable to move. "Of Taoist, Master, please have mercy and spare this disciple this time." Although his seniority was low, he was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of years. He was also the great elder of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. His status was second only to Huanglong Daoist. Now that the elders and Ji Bai Shohei were present, he had to lie on the ground and be whipped. How humiliating was that? When he thought of being whipped in public, he was so ashamed that his face turned red like fire. Huanglong Daoist did not dare to show mercy. He shouted with a dignified face, "Nye Tianxin, don't blame me for not forgiving you. You are too foolish. You ignore my advice and repeatedly offended the patriarch. You must be punished. If I am biased, I will also be whipped. You can't disobey the teachings of the ancestors and forget the rules of the sect. I hope you will learn your lesson." After that, Huanglong Daoist held the longevity vine and whipped Nye Tianxin's buttocks. Slap! A crisp explosion resounded in the hall. Nye Tianxin's purple robe was torn to shreds. Blood splattered from his buttocks. He raised his head and screamed in pain. Before he could finish his screams, the second whip lashed out. Slap! Another crisp sound rang out. Nye Tianxin's flesh was torn open. His body convulsed, and his back was soaked in cold sweat. The great elder of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, an 8th-level crossing tribulation martial lord, a white-haired old man, was being whipped in public. How humiliating was that? Not only was Nye Tianxin in pain, but he was also humiliated. He wanted to kill himself. Unfortunately, he was being punished in the hall by Huanglong Daoist. No matter how much pain and humiliation he felt, he could only grit his teeth and endure it. He did not dare to scream anymore. Instead, he kept groaning in pain. The 4 elders were the closest to Nye Tianxin. Seeing Nye Tianxin being tortured with their own eyes, their faces turned ghastly pale, and they fell silent out of fear. Before long, the 20 whips were over. The invisible divine might that was suppressing Nye Tianxin had dissipated. However, he had lost consciousness from the pain. He lay on the ground like a clay figurine, unable to get up. His back and buttocks were already badly mutilated. It was a horrible sight. The pain that went deep into his bones was etched in his heart. He did not want to experience it again in his life. However, miraculously, the messy wounds on his body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Huanglong Taoist held the longevity vine with both hands and walked to the bottom of the dais respectfully. He reported, "Master, I've finished the punishment." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly. With a wave of his sleeve, the longevity vine flew back to the lampstand and landed on the ground. "All right, you may all rise." As soon as he said those words, the murderous aura in the hall was swept away. Everyone felt relieved. They heaved a sigh of relief and quickly stood up. Nie Tianxun was in the most pain. He struggled to stand up and grimaced in pain. However, he did not dare to make a sound. Ji Tianxing looked at the Huanglong Taoist and asked, "When I returned to the mountain just now, I saw that the spiritual qi at the foot of the mountain was gone. The river had dried up, and the mountain peak was also in decline. Even the disciples were not as prosperous as they used to be. There were only 100 or 200 of them left. Huanglong, tell me, what has happened in the past 1,000 years?" At the mention of these things, the Huanglong Taoist's face was full of self-blame. He quickly bowed and said, "I was incompetent. I failed to protect Master's orthodoxy and let the Tianzhu mountain wither. Since Master ascended, too many changes and disasters have happened in the past 1,000 years. Our sect was on the verge of destruction 9 times. The twists and turns and the hardships we went through could not be finished even if I talked for 3 days and 3 nights. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Then make it short. Just report the results." The Huanglong Taoist cupped his hands and said, "Since Master left, our sect has been known as the #1 sect in the world. A tall tree attracts the wind. We have been persecuted and suppressed by countless forces and countries." Chapter 1877. The Huanglong Taoist narrated his experiences over the past 1,000 years in a sorrowful and indignant tone. Ji Tianxing reclined on the bronze throne, quietly listening to the conversation. However, no one knew that he had been secretly observing Nie Tianxun from the corner of his eyes, observing his reaction. However, Nie Tianxun's expression was calm, and his behavior was very normal. The Huanglong Taoist spoke for a while and roughly described the 9 crises that had almost destroyed the sect. "Master, after those 9 calamities, our sect has already declined and withered away, dispirited and listless. Most of the 3,000 disciples back then had died in battle or quietly fled the pillar of heaven's mountains. In recent years, the sect has only about 230 people left. Among them, there are more than 50-odd workers and 160 disciples." Ji Tianxing frowned and said in a low voice, "The number of disciples in the sect is so small that it can't even compare to ordinary second-rate sections. By the way, in the past 1,000 years, you've been fighting with various forces. Have you investigated their backgrounds?" The Huanglong Taoist thought for a while and replied, "In the past 1,000 years, there have been thousands of forces that have openly and secretly attacked the sect. The disciples divided those forces into 3 classes. The lowest class was the weakest. They were usually instigated by others or blinded by greed. These forces are not a concern. They're all a motley crew. I can't even remember their origins and names. The stronger first-rate forces are all empires or top sections. They all have martial saints and a large number of tribulation-passing experts. They are either defeated by the forces of your martial saints or want to occupy the pillar of heaven's mountains and snatch the secret manuals of martial arts. These forces are very difficult to deal with. If we are not careful, we will be heavily injured and our vitality will be greatly damaged. The truly terrifying ones are the 2 super forces hidden in the dark. One of them is the ghost clan of the North Underworld Mountain. The other force is a powerful divine nation." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing frowned and a cold light flashed in his eyes. It is understandable that the demon clan of the North Underworld Mountain wants to attack the sect. 1,000 years ago, I helped the Luo Shui martial god to kill his way into the North Underworld Mountain. He destroyed 96 tribes and slaughtered millions of demons. 4 great devil saints besieged me, and 3 of them were heavily injured by me. They hate me to the core. Naturally, they will take revenge on the pillar of heaven's mountains after I ascend. But who is the hidden force of the divine nation that you mentioned? Ji Tianqing pondered for a moment and muttered to himself, the Luo river god nation has the closest relationship with me, and they don't even have time to protect the pillar of heaven's mountains, let alone deal with it. As for the Taihao divine kingdom, martial god Taihao owes me a favor and treats me with great respect. He was not a sinister and despicable person, so it was impossible for him to deal with the pillar of heaven's mountains. Now that I think about it, only martial god Tianju had a cold and arrogant attitude, and had some animosity with me. Huanglong Daoist nodded and said, that's right. The situation is just as Master said. The disciples had clashed with that force countless times and investigated for over 100 years. Finally, they found evidence that could be used against them and their identities. It was the people from the Heaven Extinction God Nation. Furthermore, they might have been ordered by martial god Tianju. As for the Luo River God Nation, they have secretly helped us in the past 1,000 years and resolved many dangers and difficulties. If not for the Luo River God Nation's secret help, I'm afraid our sect would not have survived until today. Ji Tianqing listened calmly and thought to himself, I have not repaid the favor I owed Luo River. Now that I owe even more, I can't repay it. He looked at the Huanglong Daoist with a burning gaze and asked in a solemn tone, other than the Heaven Extinction God Nation and the North Underworld Mountain, which other forces are persecuting our sect? The 2 arrays that I set up back then have already been destroyed, causing the pillar of heaven's mountains to lack spiritual chi. To be able to see through the 108 mountain arrays, one has to be at least a martial sage. And to be able to destroy the 2 arrays, one has to be a martial god. Huanglong Daoist hesitated for a moment before replying angrily. With the 2 strong enemies, the Heaven Extinction God Nation and the North Underworld Mountain, our sect is already in imminent danger. But in our current situation, not only do we have external troubles, we also have internal troubles. Back then, when Master was in charge of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, all the sects in the world came to pay their respects, and countless geniuses were honored to join our sect. Around the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, within a 100-million-mile radius, all the villages, towns, cities, and sects have all submitted to our sect. But now, out of the 9 sects and 18 factions that submitted to us, more than half of them have become disloyal. Out of the 300 cities, tens of thousands of villages and tribes that submitted to us, more than half of them have left our sect's jurisdiction. They have either established their own sects or submitted to other sects. After hearing these words, Ji Tianqing immediately revealed a cold smile. He, as expected, back then, when our sect was strong and powerful, hundreds of cities submitted to us for protection. The 9 sects and 18 factions also submitted to us and regarded themselves as our subjects. Now that our sect has declined, the various forces have also rebelled. No wonder the 2 arrays were destroyed and the spiritual chi of heavens and earth dried up. After muttering a few words to himself, he continued, Huanglong, what other bad news do you have? Tell me all at once. Huanglong Daoist looked at him deeply, his heart filled with self-blame and shame. Obviously, Ji Tianqing was already mentally prepared and prepared for the worst. Thus, Huanglong Daoist continued to report the news. A few months ago, a large number of Ghost Clan powerhouses from the North Underworld Mountain used crafty schemes and sneaked into our sect to start a massacre. In that battle, the disciples and a few elders were injured. The 6th and 7th elders also died in battle. There were also a few deacons, more than 50 disciples, and more than 30 guards who were all killed by the Ghost Clan powerhouses. Our sect originally had more than 200 people, but only a little more than 180 people are left. Now that our sect's defense is empty, we are in imminent danger. Unfortunately, when the 9 sects and 18 factions heard the news, they took the opportunity to rebel. Only the 2 sects and the 4 factions still remember their old friendship and belong to our sect in name, but they will not lend a hand. The other 7 sects and 14 factions are divided into 2 groups. They are planning to attack the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, seize the training grounds, and seize Master's inheritance. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing's aura became even colder, and his eyes were filled with dense, killing intent. They are really treacherous and despicable people who forget their ancestors. Back then, they took the initiative to climb the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and came to beg me to take them under the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. I made an agreement with the leaders of the 9 sects and 18 factions to protect them and teach them the profoundness of martial arts. Now, they want to join forces to destroy the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and seize my martial arts inheritance? Huanglong, what are the sects in those 2 groups? Huanglong Taoist said with resentment. In the east, the Water Mirror sect, the Battle Dragon sect, and the Seeking Heaven sect colluded and gathered the 6 great sects with the Battle Dragon sect as the leader. Chapter 1878. 1,000 years ago, before the Pillar of Heaven's mountains was established, the situation within 100 million miles was very chaotic. This area was located between the North Underworld Mountain, the Luo Shui Kingdom, and the Ruins of God. It could be said to be a dangerous place. However, this area was very vast and had a radius of 100 million miles. There were more than 20 sects, hundreds of cities, and tens of thousands of villages and villages. Between the sects and cities, because of various grievances and conflicts of interest, there had always been endless killing. It was only until the Kenshin took over the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and established the sect that the chaos that had lasted for thousands of years ended. At that time, the 9 sects and 18 schools, as well as the hundreds of cities, were all frightened by the might of the Kenshin and fought to submit to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains in order to obtain protection and help. The Kenshin was obsessed with martial arts and had no intention of fighting for hegemony, so he accepted the 9 sects, 18 schools, and many cities. He even picked out more than 20 spiritual veins from the 108 mountain peaks around the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and gave them to the 9 sects and 18 schools to be their mountain gates. In his opinion, as long as the Pillar of Heaven's mountains existed, it would be a good deed to maintain peace within 100 million miles. However, he never expected that 1,000 years later, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would wither to this extent, and most of the 9 sects and 18 schools would rebel. When this matter was brought up, everyone was filled with indignation and hatred towards the 9 sects and 18 schools' actions. Compared to the hostility and persecution of the various forces, the betrayal of the former officials was more hateful. The main hall fell into silence, and the atmosphere was rather oppressive. Ji Tianxing finally understood why the Huanglong Taoist sent him a letter to return to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. In the eyes of the Huanglong Taoist, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would not be able to escape this calamity. When the 9 sects and 18 schools attacked, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would definitely fall, and countless disciples would be killed. The lucky survivors would all escape from the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, and the former number 1 sect would disappear. Therefore, before the sect was destroyed, the Huanglong Taoist had to summon the successor of the Kenshin and make arrangements for his death. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing said in a firm and dignified tone, "After more than 1,000 years of suffering in wind and rain, it is not easy for everyone to hold on until today. Although the situation is perilous, everyone should not be pessimistic. As the overseer of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, I will definitely punish the evildoers, purge the evildoers, and restore the prestige of the sect." Huanglong Taoist hurriedly nodded and said with a heavy heart, "Master, don't worry. Huanglong swears to protect the Pillar of Heaven's mountains with my life. I swear to live and die with the sect." Nie Tianxun and the other 4 elders also expressed their determination in serious tones. "Grandmaster, please rest assured. We swear to live and die with the sect." Ji Tianxing nodded with satisfaction and warned, "Today's matter must be kept strictly confidential. Especially my identity, you must not reveal it. From now on, in front of outsiders, I am a disciple of Kenshin." Huanglong Taoist and the other elders understood that his identity must be kept a secret. If the news were to leak out and outsiders knew that he was Qin Shin's reincarnation, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. At that time, it would definitely bring disaster to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Even he might be killed. After the meeting ended, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and dismissed the other elders. He brought Ji Bai and Shohei out of the main hall and entered the Pillar of Heaven's palace behind the main hall. The Pillar of Heaven's palace in the backyard was the place where he lived and cultivated in the past. After thousands of years, when he entered the Pillar of Heaven's palace, everything was still the same. The layout of the pavilions and corridors had not changed at all. Only the flowers and plants in the courtyard had been changed over and over again. Usually, the disciples and odd job workers of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would come to clean the place once every few days. The windows in the palace were clean, and the floor and pillars were spotless. Ji Tianxing walked through the corridors and entered the depths of the palace. He came to a dark brown secret room. The door of this secret room was 10 feet high and 3 feet wide. The two bronze doors were full of majestic vicissitudes of life and exuded a heavy and majestic aura. The left door was carved with a sacred beast, water qilin, and the right door was carved with a divine bird, fire phoenix. The two words sword pavilion were carved on the rock wall above the door. This was the secret room where Qin Shin went into seclusion. Ever since Qin Shin left that year, this secret room had been permanently sealed and no one had opened it again. Ji Tianxing stood in front of the door of the secret room. His eyes stared at the qilin and phoenix patterns. He slowly reached out his palms and pressed them on the bronze door knocker. Majestic and mighty golden mana surged out from his palms and poured into the bronze door. Suddenly, the dark green bronze door lit up with thousands of golden lines and emitted a dazzling golden light. The water qilin and fire phoenix patterns also seemed to come alive. They raised their heads and shouted, spreading their wings and emitting a divine, domineering aura that looked down on the world. Huanglong Daoist and Ji Bai and Shohei stood behind Ji Tianxing. They felt the ancient and vast, domineering aura. Their hearts surged, and they felt a strong sense of reverence. After 10 breaths, the two bronze doors slowly opened, emitting a dull, creaking sound. Wisps of dust fell from the lintel and doorframe. Under the golden light, they danced like thousands of golden light spots. Ji Tianxing stepped into the secret room first. Huanglong Daoist followed closely behind. Ji Bai and Shohei stood guard outside the door. The secret room was pitch black. When Ji Tianxing took 7 steps, the surrounding walls and the dome above suddenly lit up with gemstone lamps. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of bright lamps bloomed with colorful spiritual light, immediately illuminating the secret room as if it was daytime. The secret room had a radius of 100 feet. The floor was square and the dome was round. It was in accordance with the profound meaning of the circle of heaven and earth. The floor was paved with light green spiritual jade. It was engraved with mysterious and complex array patterns, as mysterious as the meridians of the human body. 36,000 gemstones were inlaid on the dome. They shone with cold silver light, forming a star chart. Under the north wall of the secret room, there was a spacious purple jade throne. On the wall behind the throne, there were hundreds of lines of seal script, recording several swordsmanship heart sutras. There was also a secret door on the wall, leading to the secret room on the next floor. Ji Tianxing walked to the purple jade throne, waved his hand to wipe away the fine dust, and sat down. Huanglong Daoist stood respectfully, waiting for Ji Tianxing's orders. He knew very well that Ji Tianxing did not bring him here just to reminisce about the old days. Sure enough, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a golden light, closing the door of the secret room. Only the two of them were left in the secret room, falling into silence. Ji Tianxing said, "Now that our sect is facing internal and external troubles, we must use thunderous means to contain them. Great Elder Nye Tianxun, have you investigated carefully? Is this person reliable?" Huanglong Daoist said with a serious face, "I understand what you mean, Master. In the past, I also suspected that there was a mole in our sect who cooperated with the enemy forces. However, I have secretly investigated for more than 30 years and only found one mole, a deacon of our sect. As for Nie Tianxun, he is my eldest disciple. He has been following me for more than 300 years. So far, I have not found anything unusual. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said expressionlessly, "What if he is a mole carefully cultivated by the heaven and divine nation and deliberately planted by them? In order to solve the mystery of ascension, it is possible for him to hide for hundreds of years." Chapter 1879. Since ancient times, the world had been isolated, and no one had been able to ascend. Countless peerless martial gods had been trapped in the Shenwu continent, and they could only live with regret for the rest of their lives. More than 1,000 years ago, Qin Shin had appeared out of nowhere and swept across the continent with his most dazzling and invincible form, ascending to the higher realms. When he became the first person to ascend in 30,000 years, all the powerhouses on the Shenwu continent believed that Tianzhu Mountain hid the mystery of ascension. As long as they could attack Tianzhu Mountain and obtain the mystery of ascension, they would be able to break the legend of the world's isolation and ascend to the higher realms like Kenshin. Not only were the martial gods tempted, but many of the martial saints on the continent were also eager to obtain the mystery of ascension. This was why Tianzhu Mountain had been besieged by various powers, and it had declined to its current state. However, only Huanglong Daoists knew that there was no such mystery of ascension at Tianzhu Mountain. Currently, there were only a few precious treasures on Tianzhu Mountain. Kenshin had left behind the Astral Sword Manual, the Firmament Array, the Divine Astral Furnace, and the Longevity Vine. Huanglong Daoist cupped his hands and said to Ji Tianxing, "Master, please do not worry. I will double my vigilance and secretly monitor Nie Tianxing's movements." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. "This is only my guess. I cannot confirm whether or not he is a spy from the heaven and divine nation. However, I have already set up a trap, and the answer will be revealed soon." "What trap?" Huanglong Daoist asked curiously. A meaningful smile appeared on Ji Tianxing's face as he explained, "Currently, only a few people know about my identity. Furthermore, I intentionally ordered everyone to keep it a secret. However, this news is too shocking, and it can even cause a huge commotion on the Shenwu continent. It can even cause chaos in the three divine nations and Dark North Mountain. If Nie Tianxun is a spy from the heaven and divine nation, then he would rather expose his identity and spread this news." Huanglong Daoist suddenly understood, and his eyes lit up. "That's right. If he is a spy, then his goal is to obtain the mystery of ascension. Now that you have reincarnated and returned, the Heaven Extinction God Nation only needs to capture you to obtain the mystery of ascension. Master, if that's really the case, then aren't you in an extremely dangerous situation?" Huanglong's expression changed, and a worried look appeared on his face. "No, I'll capture Nie Tianxun now and imprison him. Regardless of whether he is a spy or not, we would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. We can't let Master take the risk." With that, he turned to leave. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said sternly, "Wait." For the time being, they didn't want to make a move on Nie Tianxun. They just needed to keep an eye on him so that they wouldn't alert him. Moreover, I've already made plans and arrangements. If he's really a spy, it's within my expectations that he would announce my identity. Huanglong Daoist was even more puzzled. He asked, "But Master, once your identity is exposed, it will bring endless danger and trouble." Ji Tianxing shook his head gently and said, "The pillar of heaven's mountains has already withered to such a state. We must use thunderous means to save it. It's time to rise from the ashes. As long as we stir up the storm, the big fish under the water will emerge. And our pillar of heaven's mountains will be the small boat fighting the storm." Huanglong Daoist vaguely understood his meaning. After a moment of silence, he nodded solemnly and said, "Disciple will follow Master's orders." Ji Tianxing ordered again, "There's no time to lose. Let's start executing the plan now." Before the 7 sects and 14 forces send out the attack, we must complete the deployment. Huang Long, you personally lead a few elders to check the protective array. I will personally activate the firmament array. In addition, I have brought a large number of healing pills and cultivation resources. Later, you will distribute them to the disciples and ask them to heal as soon as possible. Also, the most important thing is to send a message to the 2 sects and 4 forces in your name. Ask them to come to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains for a meeting. Huanglong Taoist was startled for a moment and said with some hesitation, Master, you want to summon the people of the 2 sects and 4 forces? Right now, they are still under the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains in name and have not rebelled with the other sections. This is already the most they can do. Even if I send a message to summon them for a meeting, they will definitely not dare to come. They will definitely find all kinds of excuses to evade. Ji Tianxing nodded and said calmly, If that's the case, then I will personally go and meet the people of those sections. Huanglong Taoist could not help but ask, Master, why are you going to meet them at this time? Of course, to help them stabilize the morale of their troops and let them swear loyalty to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Ji Tianxing answered without hesitation. This. Huanglong Taoist frowned with a strange expression. He thought to himself, the situation has already developed to this point. Zhan Long Martial Saint and Ni Wuya are so aggressive. How can the 2 sects and 4 forces still be loyal to us? He almost saw no hope and was somewhat pessimistic. Master has been away for more than 1,000 years and does not understand the current situation. He is destined to return empty-handed, sigh. Huanglong Taoist sighed his heart, but he did not dare to go against Ji Tianxing's will and could only nod in agreement. Since Master wants to inspect the situation of the 2 sects and 4 forces, of course, I will accompany you. Tomorrow morning, I will take you there. Then, Huanglong Taoist left the secret room and went to gather the elders and deacons to issue a series of orders. Ji Tianxing also left the throne and walked to the stone wall behind it. He waved his hand and made a series of hand seals to open the secret door on the wall. Creak, creak, creak. After the secret door opened, a dark passage appeared. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a golden light into the passage. The passage suddenly lit up with bright lights and extended downwards. Ji Tianxing stepped into the passage and fell downwards. His figure was drowned by the dazzling lights. The passage was narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. It extended downwards and was at least 10,000 feet high. When he occupied the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, he opened up this passage in the secret room. It ran through the entire Pillar of Heaven's Mountains and extended deep underground. No one knew that under the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, there was an unprecedented divine formation called the Stellar Divine Furnace. The 108 mountains within a radius of 100,000 miles formed the Big Dipper Starnet Array and the Earth Fiend Spirit Praying Array. When these 2 super arrays were activated, they would gather endless divine power of heaven and earth and pour it into the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. The heavenly dome array of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains would gather the power of the stars and pour it into the stellar divine furnace together with the divine power of heaven and earth. As long as these 3 arrays did not stop operating, the stellar divine furnace would never be extinguished. Back then, Kenshin cultivated in the stellar divine furnace to temper his body and create the stellar body refinement art. Everyone thought that Kenshin was cultivating in seclusion in the secret room, but he was actually cultivating in the stellar divine furnace. The stellar divine furnace had a powerful and miraculous effect. It was not only beneficial to martial sages, but also to martial gods. Chapter 1880. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing passed through a hazy light and landed at the bottom of the tunnel. He was already 1,000 feet deep underground. The surroundings were extremely spacious, like a cave with a radius of 100 miles. Of course, this cave was still inside the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. In the dark sky, there were specks of fire floating in the faint silver light, like moonlight. Ji Tianxing stood in midair and looked down at the open space below him. He saw that the open space within a radius of 100 miles was densely covered with silver veins, as dense as a fishing net. Every meridian was an array pattern that extended in all directions, all the way to the edge of the empty space. In the middle of the open space, there was a tall platform that looked like a torch. In the huge torch, there was a silver flame that was more than 10 feet tall, very conspicuous in the darkness. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing's eyes dimmed. He muttered to himself. Back then, the stellar divine cauldron was operating at full power, and the stellar divine fire filled the entire cauldron. Now, there's only a weak flame left. It seems that the two heaven-earth divine arrays have been completely destroyed. As he spoke, he stepped across the sky and landed on the tall torch. The star divine fire, which was more than 3 meters tall, immediately enveloped his body and enveloped him. His clothes and hair were instantly burned to ashes. His strong and perfect body was immediately exposed to be burned and refined by the stellar divine fire. His skin and flesh were sparkling and translucent like spirit jade, and they were covered in a layer of hazy golden light. Before this, his body had been refined by the heavenly thunder and the stellar divine fire. Previously, he had also used the tribulations of wind and fire to refine his body, so his body had already reached an extremely powerful level. Even so, under the refinement of the stellar divine fire, his body was still distorted and deformed, constantly cracking and being reborn. Fortunately, the stellar divine fire is 100 times weaker, so I can withstand it with my current strength. If it was like back then, even a martial sage would be burned to ashes, and I wouldn't be able to refine my body. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself and started to use the stellar body refining art, absorbing the stellar divine fire to refine his body. As time went by, his physical body was refined and strengthened. His qi was increasing exponentially as well. If a martial artist's physical body was compared to a water bucket, then his transcendence, energy, and spiritual energy would be water. The bigger the bucket, the more water it could hold. The bodies of ordinary tribulation stage powerhouses were like buckets. Ji Tianxing's physical body had been strengthened to the peak of the tribulation stage. It was like a big water tank that could hold 20 times more water. Unknowingly, 12 hours had passed. It was the morning of the second day. After a night of tempering, Ji Tianxing's physical body had reached the peak of the cross-calamity realm, and he was now a half-step to martial sage. His skin had recovered completely. It was sparkling and translucent like jade. Not only was it shining with a faint golden light, it was also mixed with a trace of silver starlight. Even his long hair had regrown and hung loosely behind his head. As for his dermic powers and spiritual energy, they had also increased by about 5 times. He stopped cultivating and stepped away from the high platform. Shua, with a flash of light in his palm, a set of clothes flew out from the space ring and covered his body. In the blink of an eye, he had returned to his previous appearance, but his aura was even stronger. The third heavenly tribulation is probably coming soon. A playful smile appeared on his face as he flew into the sky and flew toward the exit. After 100 breaths, he walked out of the secret chamber. Ji Bai and Shohei, who had been guarding the door of the secret chamber, hurriedly greeted him. "Greetings, Grandmaster." "Grandmaster, the great immortal is waiting for you outside the hall." Ji Tianxing nodded and led the two of them out of the pillar of Heaven Palace. Outside the meeting hall, the Huanglong Taoist in an apricot yellow robe was waiting patiently. Seeing Ji Tianxing come out, he hurriedly greeted him. "Greetings, Master." Ji Tianxing raised his hand to indicate that he was excused and looked around. He saw that many disciples were busy in the palaces and courtyards around the training hall. Some were cleaning the palaces and courtyards, while others were inspecting and repairing the formation. "Let's go." Ji Tianxing brought Huanglong, Ji Bai, and Shohei to the center of the training hall. The sword steel in the middle of the training hall was still surrounded by spiritual energy, faintly emitting a majestic aura that looked down on the world. Ji Tianxing came near the sword steel and asked with his mind, "Burial of Heaven, aren't you going out with me to take a look?" The voice of Burial of Heaven sounded in his mind and replied, No need. I will stay in the sword steel to recuperate. It will be faster to recover my vitality, and at the same time, I can guard the pillar of Heaven Mountain. That's good too. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else and waved his hand to summon the black dragon. With a dragon roar that shook the clouds, a black dragon that was 10,000 feet long appeared out of thin air. Huang Long's eyes widened as he exclaimed in disbelief, "Dragon! Divine dragon! Master! Could it be that junior brother White Dragon has returned?" As he was too shocked, he did not see the black dragon's appearance clearly. After he exclaimed, he realized that something was wrong and muttered with a strange expression, "That's not right. Isn't junior brother White Dragon white? Why did he turn black after reincarnation?" Ji Tianxing glanced at him with a strange expression. He held back his laughter and explained, "This is not White Dragon. This is Master's new companion, Black Dragon." "Oh!" Huang Long came to a realization and smiled embarrassedly. Disciple forgot himself. "Master, please don't blame me." Ji Tianxing also revealed a smile and comforted, "But don't worry. Maybe in a few years, you will be able to see little White Dragon again." "Ah, really?" Huang Long Daoist was shocked and asked, "But according to the rumors on the continent, junior brother White Dragon has already died in battle." Ji Tianxing only smiled and did not explain further. Then Black Dragon carried everyone into the sky and rushed to the east as fast as lightning. About 4 hours later, Black Dragon flew more than 30,000 miles. It stopped in the sky above a giant mountain that was 30,000 feet high. This giant mountain covered an area of 300 miles. The bottom of the mountain was surrounded by green mountains and rivers. The mountain walls were steep and half of the mountain was covered by clouds. On the top of the mountain, there was an open space with a radius of 100 miles. More than 10 palaces and houses were built on it, which could accommodate thousands of people and allow them to cultivate. Obviously, this giant mountain was one of the 108 mountain peaks. It was also a place with a spiritual vein. When the 9 sects and 18 factions came to pledge their allegiance, Qin gave this mountain peak to Gui Yuan's sect. Gui Yuan's sect was in decline at that time and was about to become a second-rate sect. It was with the protection of Tianzhu Mountain that Gui Yuan's sect regained its vitality and continued to exist until today. Huanglong Daoist stood beside Ji Tianxing and pointed to the palace at the top of the mountain. He introduced, "Master, Gui Yuan's sect leader Zhao Guiyuan has already given up his position. He has been promoted to Grand Elder and has been cultivating in seclusion all year round, wanting to break through to the martial saint realm." Chapter 1881. Since Zhao Guiyuan is still alive, then things will be easier. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows as a light flashed across his eyes. Under his command, the black dragon descended from the sky towards the peak of the mountain. When it was 100 feet away from the peak of the mountain protection array of the Gui Yuan sect was activated and a thick 5-colored light shield lit up. The black dragon crashed into the 5-colored light shield and made a loud sound. Layers of ripples appeared on the half-meter thick light barrier, but it did not break. The Huanglong Daoist took a step forward and was about to shout out his identity and purpose. However, Ji Tianxing waved his hand to stop him. His eyes turned into 2 golden flames as he activated his God's Eye technique and stared at the 5-colored light shield in front of him. Suddenly, the scene in front of him changed. The 5-colored light shield turned into a dense array. It's been 1,000 years. Zhao Guiyuan really did not improve. This mountain protection array is still the 10 directions origin array that I set up back then. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing raised his palms and shot out rays of spiritual light into the 5-colored light shield. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, a door opened in the 5-colored light shield. The black dragon carried everyone through the 5-colored light door and entered the Gui Yuan sect. The layout of the Gui Yuan sect was different from the circular layout of the Tianzhu Mountain. Behind the mountain gate was a square with a radius of 10,000 feet. The Gui Yuan Hall was to the north of the square. Further back, there were more than 10 palaces and mansions that were distributed in a triangular shape. When the black dragon arrived at the peak of the Gui Yuan Mountain, it was discovered by a group of patrolling guards. This was the first time the group of guards saw the dragon god. They were all shocked and dumbfounded. When the black dragon landed on the square, the group of guards woke up from their daze and rushed over to stop it. "Who are you? How dare you trespass on our mountain gate? How should you be punished?" 9 guards rushed to the middle of the square and surrounded the black dragon with swords and knives in their hands. However, the Huanglong Taoist took a step forward and shouted with a dignified expression, "The Huanglong Taoist from Tianzhu Mountain has come to visit. Sect leader Qin, please come out to meet us." The faces of the 9 guards changed. After recognizing the Huanglong Taoist, they hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, great immortal yellow dragon. To think that the great immortal has come to visit. We have offended the great immortal. Please forgive us." "Great immortal, please wait for a moment. I will go and report the news." The 2 quick-witted guards quickly left the plaza and went to Gui Yuan Palace to report the news. Not long after, a burly middle-aged man in a golden robe walked out of the hall. This person looked to be in his 40s. His face was resolute, and he exuded the dignity of sect master. Behind him were 2 purple-robed elders. The middle-aged man came to the square and saw the black dragon at a glance. He immediately stopped in his tracks and widened his eyes in shock. "Divine dragon? How did the yellow dragon great deity get a black dragon as a mount? Could it be that the Tianzhu Mountain is in a critical situation and the yellow dragon great deity has invited strong reinforcements?" After being stunned for a moment, he suppressed the shock in his heart and went forward with the 2 elders. "Junior Qin Shan greets the yellow dragon great deity. May I know why the great immortal has suddenly come to our sect?" Qin Shan and the 2 elders bowed respectfully to Li Mu. The Huanglong Taoist said with a dignified expression, "This is not the place to talk." Qin Shan immediately understood. He extended his hand and made a pleased gesture, leading everyone to Gui Yuan Palace. Ji Tianxing kept the black dragon and brought the Huanglong Taoist and Ji Bai, Shohei, into the dignified and bright meeting hall. After entering the hall, everyone took their seats. Qin Shan sat on the sect leader's throne. Ji Tianxing sat on the left side of the seat of honor. The Huanglong Taoist sat beside him. Ji Bai and Shohei stood solemnly behind Ji Tianxing. They did not speak like 2 statues. Qin Shan observed and saw that the Huanglong Taoist was very respectful to Ji Tianxing. He could not help but feel puzzled. With the yellow dragon great deity's strength and status, why is he so respectful to this person? This should not be. Could it be that this person is the master of the black dragon, the strong reinforcements invited by Tianzhu Mountain? Thinking of this, Qin Shan secretly sized up Ji Tianxing. He felt that something was not right. At this time, the Huanglong Taoist opened his mouth and said, "Qin Shan, I have something important to discuss with you today. I would like to ask these 2 elders to leave for now." Qin Shan's expression suddenly froze. He smiled and said, "Great deity must be joking. These 2 elders are the pillars of our sect. They are definitely trustworthy people. If the great deity has any instructions, please tell them directly." He already knew that Tianzhu Mountain was in imminent danger. Soon, it would be destroyed by the major sections. The Yellow Dragon Great Deity's sudden visit to Gui Yuan sect was definitely not a good thing. He was most likely here to ask for help. Therefore, he could only remain polite on the surface. If they were to talk about serious matters, he would definitely not listen to them. The Huanglong Taoist frowned unhappily. He temporarily suppressed his anger and turned his head to look at Ji Tianxing, who was beside him. He wanted to ask for Ji Tianxing's opinion with his eyes. Ji Tianxing raised his hand slightly and knocked on the armrest of his chair with his knuckles. The Huanglong Taoist immediately understood. He shot out 2 spiritual shock waves and attacked the 2 purple-robed elders. Bang, bang. 2 muffled sounds were heard from the spiritual shock waves. The 2 purple-robed elders immediately fell into a coma and lost their consciousness. Plop, plop. The 2 of them fell down at the same time. They lay in the main hall and no longer made a sound. Qin Shan's expression suddenly changed. He stood up and stared angrily at the Huanglong Taoist. Huang Dragon Great Deity, what are you doing? The Huanglong Taoist ignored him. He waved his hand and used a secret technique. He created a protective shield with a radius of 1,000 feet and covered the entire meeting hall. All the sounds and movements in the main hall would not be heard outside. Ji Tianxing then raised his eyelids and looked coldly at Qin Shan. He said sternly, "What I am about to say is related to the survival of Gui Yuan's sect. The fewer people who know about it, the better. Years ago, Gui Yuan's sect was almost destroyed. If not for Tianzhu Mountain's protection and rescue, it would have been destroyed. When Zhao Guyuan knelt in front of me and kowtowed to me, he swore that he would always be loyal to Tianzhu Mountain. I did not expect that after more than 1,000 years, when Tianzhu Mountain was in danger, Gui Yuan's sect will be so ungrateful. Since this is the case, I have no choice but to take back my righteousness personally." Ji Tianxing's expression was indifferent. His tone was calm, but he was not angry. Qin Shan was instantly stunned. He stared at Ling Yun with a face full of shock and confusion. "You, who are you? How dare you call the great elder of our sect by his name?" Hearing this, the Huanglong Taoist laughed and said with disdain, "Qin Shan, my teacher called Zhao Guyuan by his name. Back then, when Zhao Guyuan knelt in front of my teacher, he did not even have the right to clean his shoes." "What?" Qin Shan's eyes widened again. He was shocked and angry. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said with a face full of disdain, "With your determination and wisdom, how can you be in charge of Gui Yuan's sect? I think Gui Yuan's sect is not far from being destroyed. My time is limited. I don't want to waste my breath on a junior like you. Go and ask Zhao Guyuan to come out." Chapter 1882. The cold and majestic voice was still echoing in the main hall. Qin Shan was so angry that his face was distorted and his eyes were filled with rage. "Bastard, you're still wet behind the ears. How dare you humiliate my master?" After scolding him, he glared at Huanglong Taoist and shouted, "Huanglong Taoist, did you bring this person here today to humiliate me? If that's the case, don't say that I'm not giving you face. I'm going to teach him a lesson and make him kneel down and apologize." At the same time, Qin Shan suddenly waved both of his palms and blasted out 2 flaming fists toward Ji Tianxing. The strength of a tribulation stage, 7-stage cultivator was on full display at that moment. The raging flaming fists contained destructive power. However, they were so concentrated that they did not hurt the tables and chairs in the main hall. Ji Tianxing sat on the big chair calmly. He did not even raise his hand to block the attack. Huanglong Taoist had already raised his left arm. With a wave of his wide Taoist robe, he kept the 2 flaming fists in his sleeve. The flames were extinguished instantly. The destructive power was easily neutralized by Huanglong Taoist. He looked at Ji Tianxing with anticipation and asked nervously, "Master, I've been practicing the heaven and earth in the sleeve technique that you taught me back then for thousands of years. What do you think?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said calmly, "You're 70% as good as me. You've reached the peak of perfection. However, you're still a distance away from perfection. It's not something that can be achieved through hard work. You also need some talent and comprehension." Huanglong Taoist looked satisfied and said excitedly, "Thank you for your compliment, Master. I know that I'm not very talented. I'm very lucky to be able to reach 70% as good as you." The master and disciple were discussing secret techniques in a serious manner. Qin Shan was already dumbfounded by what he saw. He was completely confused. These 2 fellows, why are they doing this? Old Taoist Huanglong is calling that kid master? Am I hallucinating or have they all gone mad? Qin Shan felt dizzy and his mind went blank. His brain was not enough to process what was happening. At this moment, Huanglong Taoist glared at him and scolded, "Qin Shan, what are you waiting for? Go get Zhao Guyuan. Don't blame me for not warning you. If you dare to play any tricks, the Gui Yuan sect will perish today." Qin Shan was shocked and angry at the same time. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling, and his face had turned purple. However, the Huanglong Taoist had a murderous look on his face. He was definitely not joking. This was a martial sage. If he really went crazy, Even if he couldn't destroy the Gui Yuan sect, he could still destroy this mountain. Thinking of this, Qin Shan could only temporarily suppress his anger. He turned around and went through the secret door in the corner of the hall, running into the depths of the palace. After passing through several winding corridors, he followed a secret passage and arrived in front of a secret room underground. The door of the secret chamber was tightly shut, and a ceiling array was set up. Qin Shan hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He waved his hand and shot out rays of golden light, knocking on the door of the secret room. "Master, disciple Qin Shan wishes to see you. Something big has happened." After a while, an old voice came from the secret room, filled with anger. "Qin Shan, what is so urgent that you have to come knocking on my door?" Qin Shan did not dare to hide anything and hurriedly reported, "Master, the Huanglong Taoist from Tianju Mountain suddenly came. He actually rode on a black dragon and brought along a young man in a white robe." The old voice became even angrier and shouted impatiently, "Bastard! What yellow dragon, black dragon, young man in a white robe? What kind of nonsense is this? Don't you know that I announced that I was going into seclusion to avoid the matter at Tianju Mountain? I have already warned you that no matter how much the Tianju Mountain begged, our sect was not to send troops to help. Otherwise, a disaster would befall us." Qin Shan hurriedly bowed and apologized. He hurriedly explained, "Master, of course I understand what you mean. However, today's situation is too special." The Huanglong Taoist came aggressively. The moment he entered the hall, he knocked out 2 elders and wanted to talk to me alone. Moreover, the Huanglong Taoist was very respectful to the young man in a white robe. He respectfully addressed him as master and behaved like a disciple. The young man in a white robe was also very domineering and arrogant. He said that the Tianju Mountain had saved our sect many years ago. Now that our sect was ungrateful, he had to come personally to take back his righteousness. He even insulted Master and said that you had knelt in front of him many years ago. Qin Shan was filled with righteous indignation and emotionally recounted what had happened. However, he did not realize that the old voice in the secret room had not moved for a long time. After a long time, Qin Shan finished recounting the entire incident. He then regained his senses and hurriedly asked, "Master, are you listening?" The secret room was still silent, and there was no movement. Qin Shan furrowed his brows and muttered to himself, "Sigh, Master must have fallen asleep again. No, I have to enter the secret room and explain it to him personally." As he spoke, he stretched out his hand to pull the door knocker of the secret room. At this moment, the door of the secret room opened with a bang. The sudden huge force forced Qin Shan to take 5 steps back before he could regain his balance. He only saw a blur in front of his eyes before a figure in a white robe rushed out crazily. At the same time, a pair of steel-like hands grabbed his shoulders. "What did you just say?" The Huanglong Taoist called the young man in a white robe master. The young man in a white robe called himself master. They were even talking about the heaven and earth sleeve. A skinny old man with white hair was grabbing Qin Shan's neck with both his hands. His eyes were wide open, and he lost control of his emotions as he shouted. Qin Shan's eyes rolled back. He hurriedly pried the old man's hands away and took a few steps back. Master, what's wrong with you?" The white-haired old man in a white robe was the previous sect leader, Zhao Guyuan. He stared at Qin Shan with a horrified expression and roared emotionally, "Tell me quickly, did you see everything just now with your own eyes? Did the young man in a white robe really say that I had knelt at his feet and vowed to be loyal to the Tianju Mountain forever? That fellow, what did he look like?" Qin Shan nodded his head repeatedly. He thought for a while and gestured with his hands. That young man in a white robe was very handsome and powerful. One look, and you could tell that he was not an ordinary person. He was 8 feet tall and wore a white robe and a pair of black cloth shoes. His face was handsome and cold. His eyes were like stars, and his eyebrows were like swords. Zhao Guiyuan was completely stunned. He stared at Qin Shan in a daze and shook his head repeatedly. He muttered, "This is impossible. It can't be him. How can there be such a miracle in the world? He had clearly been dead for 1,000 years." How can he still be alive? Qin Shan gradually calmed down. When he saw his master in a frenzy, he suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed drastically. The master of the Huanglong Taoist? Isn't that the Grand Master of the Tianzhu Mountain, Jian? Kenshin? After a long while, Zhao Guyuan took a deep breath and suppressed his shock. He asked in a deep voice, Qin Shan, think carefully. What else did the young man in a white robe say? Qin Shan hesitated for a while and stammered. He said, You, kneel. Kneel when you enter the main hall. Hearing this, Zhao Guan's body suddenly stiffened and he let out a mournful sigh. It's him. It must be him. Only he has the right to be so domineering. Qin Shan frowned and asked with a strange expression, Master, could it be that the young man in a white robe is really Kenshin? You really want to kneel when you enter the main hall? Zhao Guiyuan smiled bitterly. His eyes were filled with despair as he said in a low voice, Although this sounds unbelievable, the Huanglong Taoist would never be wrong. If that young man in a white robe is really Kenshin, it's still not too late for me to kneel now. Chapter 1883. The Guiyuan Hall was completely silent. Ji Tianxing and Huanglong Taoist sat on large chairs, patiently waiting. Ji Bai and Shohei stood by the wall, continuing to act as statues. The two purple-robed elders were still lying in the main hall, unconscious. Not long after, hurried footsteps could be heard from the secret door in the corner of the hall. The white-haired Zhao Guiyuan rushed into the hall with a flustered expression, but he immediately stopped in his tracks. He took a deep breath and suppressed his nervous heart, trying his best to remain calm. As he tidied up his appearance, he anxiously looked towards the left side of the hall. His gaze swept past Huanglong Taoist and immediately landed on Ji Tianxing's body. At the same time, Ji Tianxing also raised his eyes and looked at him indifferently. Zhao Guiyuan clearly saw Ji Tianxing's face, and he also saw the coldness and dignity in his deep eyes. Zhao Guiyuan's body immediately stiffened, as if his entire body had been petrified. Although more than 1,000 years had passed, Zhao Guiyuan's memories of Kenshin had become somewhat blurry. However, when he saw Ji Tianxing gradually overlapped with the Kenshin in his memories. That figure, appearance, temperament, even the expression in his eyes were exactly the same, without a single difference. It's him. It really is him. Zhao Guiyuan's body trembled, and his heart was filled with incomparable horror. His eyes were also covered with a thick layer of reverence. 1,000 years ago, Kenshin's glory had enveloped the entire Shenwu continent, overshadowing everyone in the world, including the three martial gods. The reverence for Kenshin had long been deeply ingrained in every martial artist's soul. Even after 1,000 years, that reverence would still appear. Zhao Guiyuan was stunned in place, and his expression became complicated. The white beard on his lower jaw also trembled. He was now certain that the white-robed youth was Kenshin. This left him at a loss, and he was completely at a loss as to what to do. Ever since Kenshin had ascended, Zhao Guiyuan had been standing for more than 1,000 years. He was already used to standing. He was used to the title of Guiyuan Yuan sect master and his dignity. How difficult would it be to make him kneel now? His heart was struggling, hesitating, weighing. Qin Shan, who was standing behind him, could clearly feel the change in his emotions. His heart was also filled with anger and humiliation. For a moment, both sides were in a stalemate. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything. He stared coldly at Zhao Guiyuan and slowly raised his right palm. He opened his palm, and a five-colored brilliance lit up. It broke through the dome of the main hall and flew into the mountain-protecting formation in the sky. Then, the 10 directions origin-returning formation that enveloped the entire origin-returning mountain sped up and released a destructive power. Rumble. Following a muffled explosion, the entire origin mountain began to tremble and shake violently. It was as if a super earthquake had arrived. Cracks began to appear on the mountain, and countless rocks fell from the mountain walls. Many of the palaces and mansions on the mountain peak were also shaking violently. Cracks began to appear on their surface, and countless tiles fell to the ground. Even the ground in the origin returning hall began to crack. Many rocks and pillars fell from the dome and smashed into the hall. Ji Tianxing and Huanglong Daoist sat there without moving. They were as steady as Mount Tai. However, Origin Returning Mountain was going through a calamity. The entire mountain peak was about to collapse. At this rate, the entire Origin Returning sect would be destroyed in at most an hour. Zhao Guiyuan and Qin Shan were both dumbfounded. Both of them widened their eyes, revealing an incomparably terrified and anxious expression. Zhao Guiyuan couldn't care less about his dignity and humiliation anymore. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed. "Your subordinate, Zhao Guiyuan, welcomes Senior Kenshin's arrival." Like a chick pecking at rice, he kowtowed 3 times in a row in fear and trepidation. Qin Shan had no choice but to kneel and kowtow like Zhao Guiyuan. At this moment, all dignity and honor were thrown out of the window. They were not as important as Origin Returning sect's 1,000 years of history. However, Ji Tianxing was unmoved. The 5 fingers on his right hand were still emitting a 5-colored radiance as he controlled the entire mountain protection formation. Origin Returning Mountain was still shaking violently, and it was still collapsing and being destroyed. The entire Origin Returning Mountain was in chaos. Countless disciples were so frightened that they fled in panic. They screamed, and the screams continued to spread into the hall. Zhao Guiyuan was so anxious that his eyes turned red, but there was nothing he could do. He knew very well that if he wanted to save Origin Returning sect, he could only beg for Kenshin's forgiveness. Therefore, he maintained his kneeling posture and quickly moved his knees, crawling towards Ji Tianxing. In just 10 breaths, he crawled 300 steps with his knees and arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. He cried and kowtowed as he begged for forgiveness. "Master Kenshin, please have mercy. It was me who was blind and did not know the difference between life and death. I actually angered you. Please punish me alone and let the Gui Yuan sect off. I will bear all the responsibility for any wrongdoings. Please let those innocent disciples go." Ji Tianxing looked down at him and said expressionlessly, "What's the point of having a treacherous sect?" Although his tone was calm, it contained a terrifying pressure that made Zhao Guiyuan tremble. He lay on the ground in fear and repented with all his might. "I am a bastard. I was blinded by greed. I forgot my ancestors. I betrayed them. No matter how Senior punishes me, I will not complain. However, Senior, please have mercy on those innocent disciples and let them live. As long as you let Origin Returning sect go, I am willing to fight for Senior with my life. I will use all of Origin Returning sect's strength to fight alongside Tianzhu Mountain." Zhao Guiyuan was a smart person. He knew the purpose of the Huanglong Daoist and Kenshin's visit. He knew Kenshin's character very well. Therefore, he did not dare to play any tricks and directly expressed his attitude. Ji Tianxing stared at him coldly and asked, "You have already betrayed Tianzhu Mountain. How can I trust you?" Zhao Guiyuan quickly raised his hand to the sky and said solemnly, "I, Zhao Guiyuan, hereby swear that I will abide by the oath. I swear to be loyal to Master Kenshin and fight alongside Tianzhu Mountain. I would rather die than regret. I ask the heavens and earth to bear witness to this oath. If I go against it, I will be punished by the heavens. My body and soul will be destroyed. Origin Returning sect will also be destroyed." After he finished swearing, Ji Tianxing slowly retracted his right palm and retracted the 5-colored brilliance. Immediately, the mountain protecting formation stopped operating and returned to normal. The Origin Returning Mountain stopped shaking, and the sounds of the mountains collapsing and the earth cracking stopped abruptly. Ji Tianxing stood up and walked in front of Zhao Guiyuan. He flicked out 2 silver water pillars with his right index finger and entered Zhao Guiyuan and Qin Shan's forehead respectively. The silver water pillar entered their minds and hid in their divine souls, faintly exuding a power that could destroy heaven and earth. Ji Tianxing did not stay any longer. He brought the Huanglong Daoist and Ji Bai out of the main hall. "I will give you a drop of starfire seed so that you can be completely at ease. After half a month, if I do not personally take out the starfire seed, the starfire will explode and your souls will be destroyed. Chapter 1884. When he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing had already led everyone out of the hall. He summoned the black dragon and brought everyone up into the sky, quickly disappearing into the sea of clouds. In the Guiyuan Hall, Zhao Guiyuan and Qin Shan were still kneeling on the ground, their faces ashen with despair. The stellar fire seed left behind by Ji Tianxing had made them feel completely hopeless. Originally, the two of them had planned to temporarily deal with it today. After sending Qin away, they would then think of a way to deal with it. But now, all their plans and fantasies have been shattered. Other than following Qin's orders, they had no other choice. Qin Shan cursed in a low voice, full of anger. He raised his fists and slammed them on the ground, smashing the stone floor into pieces. Damn bastard. How dare he use such despicable means to threaten us? But no matter how angry he was, it was useless. The stellar fire seed hidden in his soul made him obey obediently. Zhao Guiyuan seemed to have aged 10 years. He looked at the entrance of the hall with a blank expression and muttered to himself, How could he use such means to control us? The Qin of the past was the best in the world. Arrogant, he didn't even bother to use such means. He has changed. The current him has become even more terrifying. After a long while, the two of them finally calmed down. Qin Shan looked at Zhao Guiyuan and asked in a low voice, Master, what should we do now? Can you take out those 2 stellar fire seeds? Zhao Guiyuan shook his head slowly and said with a bleak expression, Stop dreaming. How can you and I resist Qin's means? The only thing we can do now is to follow his orders. Only then can we protect our lives and the 1,000 years of foundation of the Guiyuan sect. Qin Shan hurriedly shook his head and said, Aren't we digging our own graves? Not to mention the various forces that are secretly targeting Tianzhu Mountain. Just the 7 sects and 14 factions are enough to destroy Tianzhu Mountain. When Tianzhu Mountain is destroyed, we can only be buried with it. Zhao Guiyuan thought for a while and shook his head. Not necessarily. Don't jump to conclusions. Although we still don't understand why Qin, who has been dead for thousands of years, suddenly appeared. But he is Qin. He is the most mysterious and powerful expert in the world. He could create all kinds of miracles. With him around, perhaps the pillar of heaven's mountains will be able to resolve the crisis and prosper again. Qin Shan looked at him in shock and said in disbelief, Master, do you think this is possible? What a fool's dream. Zhao Guiyuan said with certainty, No, you're too young. You don't understand what the word Qin means. Qin Shan frowned and continued to ask, Qin has come back from the dead, and he only has the strength of a tribulation transcendence realm cultivator. If this news is spread, it will cause a shocking flood. Master, why don't we spread this news? Maybe it'll attract all kinds of experts to besiege Qin and kill him. Before he could finish speaking, Zhao Guiyuan glared at him and shouted angrily, Do you have a pig's brain? Do you want to die? If we spread the news, he would kill us first and destroy the entire Guiyuan sect before the other experts come to kill him. Moreover, how do you know if the experts will kill him or pledge their allegiance and help him after the news is spread? Even if 3 martial gods owe him a favor, all kinds of heroes will respond to his call. Do you understand? Qin Shan fell silent. He did not dare to have any more fantasies. At noon, the golden sun hung high in the sky. The black dragon was speeding through the sea of clouds, rushing to the west as fast as a shooting star. Ji Tianxing and the rest stood on the dragon's back. They stood proudly in the wind, their clothes fluttering in the wind. Huanglong Daoist looked at Ji Tianxing in front of him. His face was filled with a gratified smile, and his eyes were filled with excitement. Master, your methods are too brilliant. It's simple, violent, and effective. For the past few decades, I've thought of all kinds of methods, but I couldn't make Zhao Guiyuan listen to me. But you only used an hour to subdue the Guiyuan sect and make Zhao Guiyuan listen to you. Now that the Guiyuan sect listens to us, The other two sects under the Gui Yuan sect have no choice but to submit to us. Ji Tianxing looked at the sky in front of him and pondered. When he heard Huanglong Daoist's words, his lips curled into a smile. He said playfully, "Desperate times call for desperate measures." Most importantly, Zhao Guiyuan has not broken through to the martial sage realm. He has no right to resist. When Huanglong Daoist heard this, he quickly nodded in agreement. That's right. This is indeed the main reason. A few hundred years ago, I was still able to intimidate the 9 sects and 18 factions. They did not dare to rebel openly and would only obey in public. However, ever since the 2 fellows from the Battle Dragon sect and the Boundless sect reached the martial sage realm, they did not take our sect seriously. In recent years, they felt that their forces and resources were strong enough, so they dared to rebel openly. In the end, it's because there are martial sages. A cold glint flashed across Ji Tianxing's eyes. He laughed coldly. Don't worry. They won't be able to jump around for long. At most, they will have to submit in 10 days. Although Huanglong Daoist felt that this was a little unrealistic, he was still full of confidence and anticipation. As long as it was Ji Tianxing who said it, he would trust him without reservation. Even if Ji Tianxing said that he could pluck the sun from the sky, Huanglong Daoist would not doubt him. In the evening, the sun was setting in the west. The black dragon flew to the top of a mountain that was more than 2,000 feet tall and gradually came to a stop. In the surrounding 20,000 miles, this mountain was the tallest and most majestic. Its aura was also the strongest. After all, this was one of the 108 mountains. It was an excellent place with spiritual veins. Ji Tianxing stood on the back of the black dragon and looked down at the palace at the top of the mountain. Huanglong Daoist took the initiative to introduce, "Master, this is the Wuji sect." Their attitude is the same as that of the Gui Yuan sect. They will watch from the sidelines and will not help. The current sect leader is still Qi Hao. This old man is greedy for power and is unwilling to give up his position. He has been the sect leader for more than 1,000 years. Qi Hao has also passed the 8th tribulation and is trying his best to break through to the martial sage realm. His 4 disciples have also reached the 5th level of the tribulation realm and above. Ji Tianxing nodded and rode the black dragon to the top of the mountain. When the black dragon landed on the top of the mountain and was a few hundred feet away from the top, it activated the protective mountain array. A defensive light shield with a radius of 100 miles immediately appeared in the sky and covered the top of the mountain. This huge light shield was black and white. It contained the secret of yin and yang and was very powerful. The black dragon was pushed back a few hundred feet. However, it was not injured. Ji Tianxing activated the God's Eye secret technique, and his eyes immediately turned golden. He stared at the black and white light shield and observed the structure of the array. After a short 10 breaths, he saw the structure of the protective mountain array clearly. The corners of his mouth curled up into a playful sneer. Ha! The Wuji sect has improved. They know to make corresponding improvements and strengthen the Heaven and Earth Infinite Array. Chapter 1885. Upon hearing Ji Tianxing's words, the Huanglong Daoist shook his head. "Master, there's no need to go through so much trouble to break the formation. Let me negotiate with them." The black dragon crashed into the protective formation just now, so it will definitely attract the patrolling guards. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment before nodding in agreement. At the same time, he had the black dragon transform into a pitch-black dragon-shaped sword that floated behind him. Just as the Huanglong Daoist expected, a group of patrolling guards rushed over in a short period of time. The leader of the guards was a middle-aged man with a resolute face. He brought 9 guards and flew to the front, growling with a deep voice. "Who are you? How dare you trespass into the Boundless sect?" The Huanglong Daoist revealed an arrogant expression and said in a dignified tone, "Go and report to your sect master that the Huanglong Daoist from the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains has come to visit and has something important to ask." The faces of the guards changed, and they all bowed solemnly. "We didn't know that great immortal Huanglong had come. Please forgive us for our offense." "Greetings to great immortal Huanglong." Great immortal Huanglong was famous in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Regardless of whether it was the disciples of the sect or the citizens of the city, they all had to respectfully bow and call him Great Immortal. After the guard captain bowed, he said respectfully, "Please wait here for a moment, Great Immortal. This junior will go and report to the sect master." After saying that, the guard captain turned around and flew towards the peak of the mountain to report the news. Ji Tianxing and the others stood in the sky, separated from the 9 guards by a layer of light, patiently waiting. Within the Boundless sect, in the most majestic and dignified Boundless palace, in a simple and elegant study, a white-haired old man wearing a green robe was sitting in front of a large table, engrossed in reading an ancient scroll. The old man was thin and had a white beard and white hair. 2 strands of snow-white hair hung down from his temples, giving him the aura of an otherworldly expert. At this moment, a middle-aged man's voice came from outside the study. Reporting to Sect Master, the Huanglong Taoist of Tianju Mountain has come to visit. He is waiting outside the mountain protection formation. He said that he has something important to ask. The green-robed, white-haired elder was Chi Hao, the sect master of the Wuji sect. Hearing the guard's report, he quickly put down the ancient book in his hand and furrowed his brows. Old Taoist Huang Long actually came to visit our sect personally? This old fellow must be seeking help from me in order to save the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Chi Hao muttered to himself as the corners of his mouth curled up into a sneer. Oof. The Pillar of Heaven's mountains had already declined to such an extent that it was not far from destruction. Soon, it would be destroyed by the other 7 sects and 14 factions. The reason why our sect didn't rebel, because we didn't want to bear the bad reputation of being a traitor. This old man is already benevolent enough not to loot a burning house. How can I possibly help the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? Isn't that courting death and being buried with the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? At this point, Chi Hao made up his mind and ordered in a dignified tone, "Go and tell the Huanglong Taoist that I have already gone into seclusion and will only come out after at least 10 years. No matter what, ask him to wait for me to come out of seclusion." The guard captain outside the door immediately bowed and received the order. He said respectfully, "I understand." Ji Tianxing and the Huanglong Taoist waited patiently for the time it took to burn a stick of incense before they saw the guard captain return. The guard captain came closer and bowed to the Huanglong Taoist. He replied expressionlessly, reporting to Great Immortal Huanglong, "Our sect master has already gone into seclusion to cultivate. Our sect master wants to comprehend the divine technique and will only come out after at least 10 years. If Great Immortal has any matters, please wait for our sect master to come out of seclusion before you visit." The Huanglong Taoist originally thought that Chi Hao would meet him no matter what and would not even give him face. However, he did not expect that the other party would reply in such a way. His face immediately darkened, and he scolded angrily, "Bastard! Half a year ago, this old man still had communication with Chi Hao. How could he have gone into seclusion?" The guard captain revealed a look of fear and trepidation. However, he explained in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Please calm down, Great Immortal. This matter is absolutely true. This junior is only responsible for transmitting the message and is unable to help. If there is nothing else, this junior will take his leave. Great Immortal, please go back." After saying that, the guard captain turned around and flew away with the 9 guards. The Huanglong Taoist was left in the same place. He was so angry that he frowned and a cold light surged in his eyes. Damn that Chi Hao. This old man is really capable. In the past, he only dared to obey in public, but disobey in private. Now that I have personally come to see him, he dares to shut his door and refuse to see me. The Huanglong Taoist's status and authority had been greatly challenged and despised. Of course, he was full of anger. However, Ji Tianxing had already expected this result. He said calmly, "The world is fickle. Chi Hao's reaction is normal. You don't have to take it to heart. Since he doesn't know what's good for him, I will teach him an unforgettable lesson." After saying that, he activated the mystic eye technique and stared at the mountain guarding array in front of him. He formed a spell with both hands and shot out streaks of dazzling light. He poured a vast amount of five-colored Dharma power into the infinite heaven and earth array. This infinite heaven and earth array was not set up by him. However, this kind of saint-level array was not difficult for him. He only needed to spend some time to break it. As he used the mystic array technique and poured 18 streaks of five-colored Dharma power into the black and white light shield, the array's veins immediately changed. After a short 30 breaths of time, the formation was broken, and a hole with a radius of 30 feet appeared. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Ji Tianxing brought Huang Long and Ji by Shohei into the formation through the gap. Then, they quietly landed on the peak of the mountain and hid in a forest. Ji Tianxing continued to cast spells with his palms and shot out thousands of streaks of five-colored light into the infinite heaven and earth array. Huanglong Taoist immediately guessed his intention. He asked, "Master, are you planning to control this mountain-guarding array and destroy the infinite mountain to teach Qi how a lesson?" "That's right." Ji Tianxing nodded. Huanglong Taoist said angrily, "Then I will help you. This time, we must destroy most of the Wuji sect. Only then can we intimidate Qi Hao." Ji Tianxing shook his head and refused his help. "You don't need to help me. Take the Black Dragon Sword and Ji Bai and prepare to block the Wuji sect." Huanglong Taoist was startled for a moment. He quickly turned his head to look at the middle of the mountain peak and saw a few streaks of light rushing over. Obviously, Ji Tianxing's invasion and modification of the infinite heaven and earth array had alarmed the experts of the Wuji sect. Huanglong Taoist glanced over and saw 5 tribulation stage experts among the 5 streaks of light. Therefore, he grinned coldly, held the Black Dragon Sword, and led Ji Bai and Shohei to meet them. "Let's go. Let's give them some appetizers first." After 2 breaths, Huanglong Taoist rushed to the middle of the mountain peak and landed in the square. Ji Bai and Shohei also quickly followed and stood behind him, holding the sword in their arms. Chapter 1886. The Huanglong Taoist and Ji Bai stood in the middle of the square. The 5 streaks of light flew closer and landed 100 steps away from them. Swish, swish, swish. A burst of multicolored light flashed, and 5 experts of different heights and sizes lined up in a row on the square. Among the 5 people, 2 of them were old men in black robes. Both of them had white hair and carried black heavy swords on their backs. The Huanglong Taoist recognized them. They were the left and right protectors of the Wuji sect. The other 3 experts in purple robes were the 3 protectors of the Wuji sect. The 5 of them looked coldly at the Huanglong Taoist with displeasure, secretly accumulating power. The left protector questioned first, "Great immortal Huanglong, our sect master is in seclusion and can't see any guests. You actually broke through the formation and barged in. You're looking down on our sect." The right protector also echoed, "Great immortal Huanglong, you're a respected senior. How can you do such a thing? Aren't you afraid of damaging your reputation and that of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? If you leave now, our sect can pretend that nothing happened." Before he could finish, the Huanglong Taoist sneered angrily, "Humph. You juniors still know that I'm a senior? Why don't you salute me when you see me? Furthermore, the Wuji sect is a subordinate of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. I'm here to inspect the sect, but Qi Hao closed the door and refused to see me. Do you have any respect for me?" As soon as he finished speaking, he released a formless aura that spread in all directions and enveloped the entire square. Immediately, cracks appeared on the ground of the square, which had a radius of thousands of feet, along with a series of cracking sounds. The left and right protectors and the 3 elders were also suppressed by the formless aura. Their faces turned pale, and their bodies trembled. Even so, everyone clenched their teeth and endured. The left protector defended himself with a firm tone. "Our sect master is indeed in seclusion. How can he refuse to see you? Great immortal Huanglong, you're using your status and strength as a martial saint to distort the truth and slander our sect master." He slander? Huanglong Taoist immediately sneered and shouted in a low voice like muffled thunder. Then this old man will show you whether Chi Hao is in seclusion or not. Hearing this, the expressions of the 5 powerhouses changed, and they all roared angrily. Huanglong Taoist, what are you trying to do? Even if you're a senior, you can't be so unreasonable. Stop. However, the Huanglong Taoist sneered at the crowd and stomped his right foot on the ground. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion erupted, shaking the heavens. At that moment, the entire everlasting mountain began to tremble violently. The ground at the peak of the mountain also began to tremble violently. With the Huanglong Taoist as the center, the ground of the entire square had completely collapsed. The cracks were like a spider web. However, this was only on the surface. The destructive power rushed into the mountain. Many of the secret chambers and underground palaces that the Wuji sect had built beneath the ground were instantly destroyed. Large cracks also appeared on the mountain walls of the everlasting mountain, and countless rocks and stones collapsed. The dozen or so palaces and residences at the peak of the mountain shook violently dozens of times. Large cracks appeared on the walls, and pillars were broken. After a full 10 breaths of time, this earthquake finally ended. The boundless sect was thrown into disarray as if a dog was flying and a dog was jumping around. Countless disciples fled in panic and gathered together to discuss what had happened. The Huanglong Taoist stroked his beard with a smile and said with his head held high, "This old man only used 30% of his strength. This old man will stomp again every 100 breaths of time. If Chi Hao still doesn't come out, then your Wuji sect will have to find another sect." The expressions of the left and right protectors and the 3 elders instantly became extremely ugly. They were both angry and humiliated. Huanglong Taoist, you've gone too far. You want to destroy the everlasting mountain and destroy our sect's 1,000-year-old foundation? Damn it. For 1,000 years, the outside world has been saying that the Huanglong Taoist is a person of virtue, prestige, and kindness. I didn't expect you to be so despicable and bully the weak. Huanglong Taoist, even if you're a martial sage, you shouldn't humiliate our sect like this. You're forcing our sect to go to war with the pillar of heaven's mountains. Everyone cursed with righteous indignation, denouncing the Huanglong Taoist's crimes. The Huanglong Taoist was indeed an honest and kind elder. He was also a senior of virtue and prestige. What he did just now was definitely not his nature. It was only because Kenshin had returned that he had the confidence to rely on Ji Tianxing's methods. Faced with the reprimands of the experts, he retorted with a straight face, "What a joke. Back then, it was the pillar of heaven's mountains that gave you a place with a spirit vein for you to rest and recuperate. The Wuji sect was besieged by several other sects and was almost exterminated. It was the pillar of heaven's mountains that kept you safe until today. Today, even if I destroy the Wuji sect, I'm only taking back the territory of the pillar of heaven's mountains. What right do you have to be angry?" The left and right protectors and the 3 elders were all red with anger and could not refute. After all, what the Huanglong Taoist said was the truth. If the pillar of heaven's mountains had not united the surrounding 100 million miles and arranged mountain bases for the 9 sects and 18 factions, the Wuji sect would have been exterminated long ago. If it was not for Kenshin's words, Sect Master Chi Hao would have been killed by the experts of the other sections. Even if more than 1,000 years had passed, this history could not be erased. The left and right protectors and the 3 elders could not stand on the side of reason and could only change the topic. Next, a few elders and more than 10 deacons arrived at the square one after another. Almost all the higher-ups and experts of the Wuji sect were present. Everyone was together to suppress the Huanglong Taoist. Chi Hao was the only one who did not show up. The Huanglong Taoist talked with everyone while releasing his divine sense to search for Chi Hao's traces in the mountain. Soon, 100 breaths passed. The Huanglong Taoist stomped his foot again and released 40% of his power into the Wuji sect. Boom! With a loud noise, the entire square collapsed and turned into a huge pit. This huge pit extended in all directions and covered most of the mountain peak. More than 10 palaces and houses were all tilted and on the verge of collapse. Thousands of disciples fled into the sky in panic or gathered in the open space, watching this scene with fear. The elders of the Wuji sect were infuriated when they saw how badly their sect had been destroyed. They couldn't hold back their anger anymore. "Huanglong Taoist, you've gone too far. We'll fight you to the death. We'd rather die here than surrender. Huanglong Taoist, you forced us to do this." The left and right protectors, 6 elders, and 14 deacons all took out their weapons and surrounded the Huanglong Taoist. They were about to attack immediately. At this moment, a cold, angry roar came from the broken palace. "All of you stop." As this voice sounded, a white-haired elder in a green robe flew over like a flash of light and landed in the square. The Huanglong Taoist sneered when he saw the green-robed elder. Chapter 1887. The green-robed old man was the sect leader of the Infinity Sect, Qi Hao. He did not want to show himself and did not want to discuss the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain with the Huanglong Taoist. However, he did not expect the Huanglong Taoist to change his attitude and use such a shameless method to force him to show himself. Seeing that the Wuji Mountain had been destroyed, the elders and deacons of the Infinity Sect were about to attack the Huanglong Taoist. Qi Hao was forced into a corner, and he had no choice but to show himself. After all, the Infinity Sect could not afford to offend the Huanglong Taoist. A martial sage could destroy the Infinite Mountain and kill 80% of the Infinity Sect's disciples. Then he could escape. If a fight broke out, the Infinity Sect would suffer heavy losses. After Qi Hao arrived, the elders and deacons crowded around him and complained to him about the Huanglong Taoist crimes. Sect leader, the Huanglong Taoist has gone too far. Sect leader, the Wuji Mountain has been destroyed by him. We cannot let him off. The Pillar of Heaven's Mountain is digging their own grave by being so aggressive. If the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain is heartless, then don't blame us for being heartless. We want to leave the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain too. Hearing the angry shouts of the crowd, Qi Hao waved his hand and signaled for the crowd to quiet down. The Huanglong Taoist looked at him sternly and ordered, "Qi Hao, get everyone to leave. I want to settle the score with you." Qi Hao frowned and ordered, "Other than the left and right protectors, everyone else is to leave." The elders and deacons were unwilling to leave. However, they had to obey the sect leader's orders. Soon, the elders and deacons left. Only Qi Hao and the left and right protectors were left in the huge square. Qi Hao stared fiercely at Huanglong Taoist and asked in a deep voice, "Great immortal Huanglong, you don't have to tell me why you're here today. If you come with sincerity and have a friendly discussion with our sect, perhaps our sect will consider our old friendship and provide assistance to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains to the best of our ability. But you're being rude, and aggressive. You're simply trampling on the dignity of our sect. I can tell you bluntly that now that things have developed to this stage, our sect will never reconcile with the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Even if you go on a killing spree here today, our sect will not comply. We will fight to the end. Even though the Boundless sect is weak, they will not tolerate humiliation." Before Huanglong Taoist could speak, a cold and dignified voice came from the ruins at the edge of the square. "How dare such a treacherous and shameless sect talk about the dignity of sect? Do you have the right to talk about integrity?" The sudden voice stunned Qi Hao and the left and right protectors. The 3 of them were full of anger and looked coldly at the edge of the square. They saw a young man in a white robe stepping out of the ruins. He walked over 1,000 feet with each step. This person was handsome and heroic. His face was cold, and his eyes were as deep as the stars. They contained a frightening divine power. The left and right protectors frowned, and their eyes were full of vigilance. Qi Hao stared at the young man in the white robe. His eyes were as wide as copper bells, and his eyes were full of horror. His expression gradually changed, revealing a look of disbelief and shock. His entire body stiffened. After a few breaths, the young man in the white robe came to the center of the square and stood still beside Huanglong Taoist. Qi Hao came back to his senses. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost. His body trembled as he exclaimed, You, how could you? He was in a mess. His mind was blank, and he almost lost the ability to think. His words were incoherent. The left and right protectors did not know the young man in the white robe. When they saw Chi Hao's frightened reaction, they felt a little strange and were secretly puzzled. The young man in the white robe was Ji Tianqing. He looked at Chi Hao indifferently and shouted in a deep voice, Evil creature, kneel down and admit your mistake when you see me. Such a familiar figure, face, and temperament. Even his eyes and voice were like that person's. Chi Hao no longer had any doubts. He exclaimed in horror, Sure enough, it's really you. How can you still be alive? Ji Tianqing frowned. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and his whole body emitted a sacred and majestic aura. It rushed toward Chi Hao like a raging wave. Suddenly, Chi Hao's body swayed like a willow in the wind. His face was pale, and he was sweating profusely. He was extremely terrified. At that moment, countless memories appeared in his mind. They were all scenes from back then. That person's peerless divine might swept through his memories like a tide, filling his mind. The reverence and fear that came from the depths of his soul made him unable to keep calm. His knees gave way, and he knelt on the ground. Thud! Chi Hao put his hands on the ground, lowered his head, and kowtowed respectfully. Chi Hao, greetings. Lord Kenshin. The left and right protectors looked at this scene with their mouths agape. They were petrified and dumbfounded. Neither of them expected that the sect master, who was full of arrogance and majesty just a moment ago, would kneel on the ground so sincerely. They also did not expect that the sect master would address the young man in the white robe as Lord Kenshin. Although they had never seen Kenshin's appearance, they had heard about Kenshin's deeds since they were young. For countless years, they had regarded Kenshin as their idol and role model, and they had worked hard to cultivate. They had also felt extremely regretful for the fall of the Sword God. But now they were seeing Kenshin with their own eyes. The left and right protectors were stunned for a moment, but they were unable to maintain their calm. They knelt down and bowed respectfully. This junior greets Lord Kenshin. Ji Tianqing ignored the left and right protectors and stared down at Chi Hao. His gaze was cold as he said in a low voice, Chi Hao, today, you have completely fallen. Thousands of years have passed, and it seems that you have already forgotten that period of time. The Boundless sect obtained a rare treasure and was attacked by the 3 great sections. More than half of their disciples were slaughtered, and their sect was destroyed. Let me ask you, who was it that ordered the 3 great sects to retreat when the Boundless sect was on the brink of destruction? Chi Hao crouched on the ground, his entire body trembling slightly, and his forehead was covered in dense beads of sweat. His expression was extremely ugly, and the expression in his eyes was complex. After a moment of silence, he replied in a hoarse voice, It was you, Senior. You were the one who protected the Boundless sect. Ji Tianqing asked in a cold voice, Let me ask you again. After the 3 great sects retreated, they sent out a dozen or so experts to secretly kill you and your 2 enforcers and steal the rare treasure. The 2 enforcers died in battle to protect you, and you were severely injured. Your legs were cut off, and your life was hanging by a thread. Who was the one who appeared in time, forced the 3 great sects experts to retreat, and personally saved your life? And who was the one who gave the Boundless sect a treasure trove of spirit veins to recuperate? Chi Hao's body stiffened, and his expression became even uglier. Cold sweat poured down his body like rain. Chapter 1888. Ji Tianqing asked 3 questions in a row, causing Chi Hao's expression to become extremely terrified. His cold and authoritative voice was like a sharp knife stabbing into Chi Hao's heart. Not only was he terrified, but he was also sweating profusely as he lay on the ground in shame. Even the left and right protectors behind him had ugly expressions, and their eyes were filled with shame. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said coldly, Very good. No matter how much of a bastard you are, at least you haven't lost your humanity and still remember what happened in the past. Then let me ask you one last time. I was the one who gave you your life. I was the one who gave you this Wuji mountain. And I was the one who saved the entire Wuji sect. How is it that you can be so ungrateful and shameless even now? Where's your conscience? Where is your humanity? Every single shout was like divine lightning from the 9 heavens, and it fiercely blasted onto Chi Hao's body and struck his soul. His body trembled again and again, and his expression and eyes were filled with extreme shame. He had nothing to say, and he didn't have the courage to answer these questions. He could only press his lips together and remain silent. Ji Tianqing sighed and slowly raised his hands. He said expressionlessly, "Perhaps you weren't wrong, and the Wuji sect wasn't wrong either. I was the one who was wrong. I shouldn't have saved this lowly sect back then, and I definitely shouldn't have saved an ungrateful life. Since that's the case, I will end this mistake today. The Wuji sect, and you don't need to exist anymore." As soon as he finished speaking, he formed a hand seal with his hands, and thousands of streaks of 5-colored spiritual light flew into the sky and the ground. Instantly, the entire protective formation sped up, and the black and white defensive light barrier also released a 5-colored light that shot into the sky. A vast aura of heaven and earth erupted, and a terrifying amount of heaven and earth divine power surged into the Wuji mountain. The Wuji mountain began to tremble violently, and a series of earth-shattering rumbles sounded. Huge ravines began to appear on the cliffs and cliffs of the mountain. The ground at the peak of the mountain was shattering, and many palaces and residences began to collapse, sending debris and dust into the air. The Boundless Mountain's mountain protecting Grand Array actually released the power of annihilation, wanting to destroy this giant peak. Chi Hao and the left and right protectors were dazed for a moment before they came back to themselves and roared in grief and indignation. No. Lord Kenshin, please show mercy and let us go. Lord Kenshin, this junior knows his wrongs. The Boundless Sect knows its wrongs. Ji Tianqing was not moved at all. His hands were still casting spells to control the protective mountain array. The everlasting mountain shook even more violently, accelerating its collapse. Thousands of disciples were fleeing in panic, screaming in fear and despair. However, no one could resist the power of the protective mountain formation, much less the divine power of heaven and earth. Everyone fell into despair, but they were unable to escape from the everlasting mountain. They could only be trapped in the array and welcome the arrival of death. Chi Hao was also in despair. His heart was filled with anxiety, worry, regret, and shame. He was on the verge of a mental breakdown. Too many things had happened in this short period of time. The shock and impact on him was simply too great. Now, he could no longer bear the burden. He kowtowed desperately and begged for mercy. Tears streamed down his face as he cried, "Senior Kenshin, Chi Hao knows his wrongs. I beg you, please let me live. I, Chi Hao, swear to the heavens that I will be loyal to the pillar of heaven's mountains until the end of my life. I will not dare to have any other thoughts. I will live and die with the pillar of heaven's mountains. Please believe me one more time. Spare my life and spare the Boundless Sect." As he begged for mercy, he knocked his head repeatedly on the ground, shattering the stone floor. Blood also appeared on his forehead. As long as he could live, as long as he could protect the Boundless Sect, he could not care less about anything else. His personal honor and the dignity of the sect were all thrown out the window. As for resisting, in front of Kenshin and the Huanglong Taoist, that was absolutely impossible. Chi Hao and the left and right protectors didn't even dare to think about it. They didn't even dare to think about it. Kenshin's might was so great that even the 3 martial gods paled in comparison. Who would dare to oppose him? At that moment, Ji Tianqing slowly retracted his hands and stopped channeling his techniques. The protective formation immediately stopped operating, and the Boundless Mountain also calmed down. Everything came to an abrupt end. Only the screams and cries of the countless disciples continued for a long time before coming to a stop. When he saw that Ji Tianqing had finally stopped, Chi Hao, who had been kowtowing and begging for mercy this entire time, finally let out a sigh of relief. His eyes revealed the expression of someone who had just survived a calamity, as if he had just walked through the gates of hell. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat. "Thank you, Senior Kenshin, for your mercy. Thank you, Senior, for not killing me." He regained his composure and continued to kowtow in gratitude, not daring to complain in the slightest. The left and right protectors also kowtowed, and the fear and despair in their hearts gradually dissipated. Ji Tianxing looked at Qi Hao indifferently and said, "I gave you your life. I can take it back at any time. I saved the boundless sect, and I can destroy it at any time. Seeing that you have repented for your mistakes, I will let you live for another half a month." Upon hearing this, Qi Hao and the left and right protectors were both stunned. They did not quite understand what he meant. At the same time, Ji Tianxing raised his palms and shot out 3 silver balls of light. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 silver balls of light the size of date pits quickly burrowed into the glabella of the 3 people and entered their divine souls. Instantly, the 3 of them felt their bodies turn cold, and a terrifying fire seed appeared in their divine souls. These 3 fire seeds will hide in your divine souls for half a month. No one can take them out except for me. After half a month, the fire seeds will explode, and you will all be turned to ashes. If you don't want to die, then obediently wait for my orders." Ji Tianxing's expression was indifferent. Then, he turned around and left with the Huanglong Taoist. Qi Hao and the left and right protectors were stunned. Their eyes were filled with fear and despair, and their hearts sank to the bottom. The 3-star fire seeds had cut off their last hope and escape route. At this point, they had no other choice. The 3 of them came to their senses and hurriedly kowtowed to Ji Tianxing's back. They called out respectfully, "Farewell, Lord Kenshin." A moment later, after Ji Tianxing, Huanglong, and the others disappeared into the horizon, Qi Hao and the other 2 people raised their heads. The pressure that had enveloped them gradually dissipated, and the fear that lingered in their hearts also slowly receded. The 3 of them gradually calmed down and looked up at their surroundings. Seeing that the Wuji mountain was covered in cracks and was in a mess, Qi Hao and the left and right protectors wanted to cry, but no tears came out. When they recalled what had happened in the last 15 minutes, the 3 of them still felt like a dream. Everything was unreal. Even now, Qi Hao and the left and right protectors could not believe that Kenshin, who had been dead for thousands of years, had appeared again. Such a shocking thing was simply an unprecedented miracle. A moment later, the left protector could not help but ask, "Sectmaster, what should we do next?" Chapter 1889. In the middle of the night, the Black Dragon carried Ji Tianxing and the others back to Tianzhu Mountain. After returning to Tianzhu Palace, Ji Tianxing brought Huanglong Taoist into the secret room. Ji Tianxing sat on the throne. Huanglong Taoist stood in the secret room with a gratified smile and said, "Master, now that Wuji sect and Guai Yuan sect have been subdued by you, the other 4 sects will also listen to your orders. At that time, even if the 7 sects and 14 schools attack us, we will have more help. What other orders and plans do you have?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "The 2 sects and 4 schools are weak, so the help they can provide is limited. If we want to resist the siege of the 7 sects and 14 schools, it is not enough. The key is that Tianzhu Mountain needs to improve its strength." He took out a jade slip from his interspatial ring and tossed it to Huanglong with a wave of his hand. He instructed, "The Stellar Sword Codex that I left behind all those years ago, the secret techniques and supreme techniques in it are only the initial embryonic form. In the following hundreds of years, I have perfected those secret techniques to the extreme. In this jade slip, the perfect Imperial Sword Sutra is recorded. Take it and study it well, and improve your strength as much as possible." Huanglong Taoist's eyes lit up, and he said excitedly, "The perfect Imperial Sword Sutra? Master, after you ascended to the upper realm, you became the divine king that ruled over thousands of gods, so you have perfected the Imperial Sword Sutra into a cultivation technique for gods?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and explained, "The mysteries of sword arts are the same as the mysteries of martial arts. They are endless. However, you are still unable to cultivate the God-level Imperial Sword Sutra. The Imperial Sword Sutra that I gave you is only suitable for martial saints and martial gods. With your current strength, if you cultivate the first-generation Imperial Sword Sutra, you can only hide your sword in the void and control 9 swords. If you can cultivate the perfect Imperial Sword Sutra, not only will you be able to hide your sword in the void, but you will also be able to control 36 swords. Huanglong Daoist's blood surged, and he became more and more excited. That's great. The Imperial Sword Sutra that Master created is definitely the #1 secret technique of sword arts in the world. Master, please put it down. Disciple will definitely do his best to comprehend it and definitely won't disappoint Master. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Go and cultivate. I still have many things to do." Huanglong Daoist cupped his hands and bowed. Disciple obeys. Don't worry, Master. Disciple has already arranged spies and scouts to monitor the movements of the 7 sects and 14 factions. If they attack, we will receive the news immediately. In addition, the elders of our sect will also try to reinforce the formation. The disciples will also try to heal their injuries and recover their strength as soon as possible. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood and waved his hand to signal him to leave. After the Huanglong Daoist left, he was the only one left in the secret chamber. Only then did he reveal a grave expression and frown. I was able to subdue the Gui Yuan sect and the Wuji sect today because Zhao Guiyuan and Shi Hao had not broken through to the martial sage realm. They had no right to resist. Moreover, these 2 sects are indebted to me. They fear my might back then, which is why they submitted so easily. However, the 7 sects and 14 factions have 2 martial sages, and they have the right to resist. Even if I appear to suppress them, my strength is only at the peak of the crossing calamity stage. My deterrence is greatly reduced. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. He frowned and pondered for a moment. Then, he had an idea. I have to find a way to perform the Armillary Heaven secret skill and merge my aura with the heavens and earth. Only then can I hide my strength and not let the martial sages see through me. The Armillary Heaven secret skill was an ancient secret skill from the Antiquity Age. It had been lost for thousands of years. Back then, he had accidentally obtained 2 pages of a cultivation technique in a secret realm. Only then did he learn the Armillary Heaven secret skill. Later, he found the complete incantation of the Armillary Heaven secret skill in the Dragon Realm. Only then did he master it. The effect of this god-level secret skill was far from just hiding one's strength and realm. It had many other uses. Even in the upper world, he would often use it. However, Ji Tianxing only had the strength of the crossing calamity stage. Even if he had the complete incantation of the secret skill in his memory and countless cultivation experiences. However, he did not have enough strength to perform the Armillary Heaven secret skill. If I reach the martial sage realm, I can perform the god-level secret skill in advance. Now, I can only find another way and borrow the divine power of the heavens and earth. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing walked out of the secret room and came to the dojo at the peak of the mountain. He walked to the foot of the sword steel and said to Burial of Heaven with his divine thought, "Burial of Heaven, you have to help me." The pitch-black sword steel shone with a faint fluorescent light. It was surrounded by 5-colored spirit chi. Burial of Heaven's deep voice sounded in his mind. "What do you need me to do?" "I want to activate the Armillary Heaven formation. With the formation and your help, I can perform the Armillary Heaven secret skill." Burial of Heaven thought for a while and said in a low voice, "You are weak now, and your identity has been exposed. You do need the Armillary Heaven secret skill to hide your true realm. The Armillary Heaven formation should also be activated. Not only can it protect the dojo, but it can also help me recover my strength quickly." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else and stepped into the night sky. After 9 steps, he was already high up in the sky and stood at the top of the sword steel. He sat cross-legged at the top of the sword steel and slowly raised his palms. Then, he began to cast a spell. Swish, swish. As his palms moved quickly, They flew up and down, left and right, drawing thousands of mysterious trajectories in the night sky. Dazzling, five-colored spiritual light flew out of his fingertips and landed in the surrounding dojos. At the same time, large ancient seal characters would appear in the night sky around him. It was a secret seal that could gather boundless magic power and activate the power of the heaven and earth and the Great Formation. At the same time, the 1,000-feet sword steel also released a five-colored spiritual light that poured down like a waterfall and into the dojo. About 100 breaths later, Ji Tianqing's secret technique was finally completed. He sat on the sword steel with a solemn expression. His left hand formed a seal and pointed to the night sky, while his right hand formed a seal and pointed to the ground. At this moment, the night sky was clear and there were stars shining brightly. There was also a bright moon that shone down its moonlight for hundreds of millions of miles. Ji Tianqing's left hand activated the power of the stars, causing specks of silver light to fall from the night sky and sprinkle on the dojo like rain. His right hand poured boundless magic power into the dojo like a water column. The Burial of Heaven also released a boundless power and poured it into the dojo. The dojo within 100 miles was immediately enveloped by the brilliance of the stars and magic power. The ground was covered with a layer of five-colored spiritual light. The densely packed patterns and patterns of the formation also lit up as if they were alive. Boundless magic power flowed among the hundreds of millions of patterns and quickly spread in all directions. The night sky was dark and silent. Time passed silently. In the entire dojo, there was only Ji Tianqing alone. No one came to disturb him. About 2 hours later, the 100-mile dojo was covered with spiritual light. The hundreds of millions of patterns all lit up with starlight. A vast power that encompassed the heaven and earth was born in the dojo. It spread in all directions and was about to cover the entire pillar of heaven's mountains. Chapter 1890. Unknowingly, an entire night had passed. When the first light of dawn arrived, the sky dome formation had been successfully activated. A faint layer of spiritual light lit up the dojo within 100 miles. An invisible force formed a huge defensive light shield that covered the entire pillar of heaven's mountains. The light shield was usually hidden and would only reveal itself when it was attacked by external forces. Of course, the defensive power of the sky dome formation gathered the power of heaven and earth and could be called a god-level formation. Ordinary martial sages would not be able to break it. With the protection of the sky dome formation, the pillar of heaven's mountains was safe. As long as no martial gods came, no one would be able to enter the dojo at the peak of the mountain. However, this was not enough. This was only the first step of Ji Tianqing's plan. He sat on the peak of the sword steel, bathed in the warm morning sun, and began to meditate. As he breathed, the white clouds and the morning sun around the pillar of heaven's mountains turned into spiritual energy and surged into his body. He was using a secret technique to gradually merge with heaven and earth. Only by breathing with heaven and earth and sharing fate with heaven and earth could he successfully use the chaotic heaven secret technique. The Burial of Heaven sword also shone with a five-colored spiritual light. It continuously devoured the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, turning it into magic power and transferring it to Ji Tianqing. Of course, the sky dome formation was also operating silently, helping Ji Tianqing to gather the spiritual energy of heaven and earth within 100 miles. His entire body was wrapped in the five-colored spiritual light, like a huge cocoon. As the spiritual energy of heaven and earth became denser, the five-colored light ball became more and more dazzling. After a few hours, he was already as dazzling as the sun, competing with the blazing sun in the sky. During this process, many disciples noticed that something was amiss. They could clearly sense that the peak of the mountain was protected by an invisible shield, as if the spiritual energy had recovered. Many people also noticed the abnormality of the dojo. They saw that the entire dojo was lit up, and the sacred sword steel in the middle of the dojo was also emitting a five-colored light. The disciples were very shocked. They cheered in surprise and ran to spread the news. In their eyes, the awakening of the dojo and the sacred sword was an auspicious move from heaven. In recent years, the pillar of heaven's mountains had been declining, and the situation had become more and more dangerous. A layer of haze shrouded the hearts of all the disciples. It was very heavy and very oppressive. No one could see any hope. They would only feel more and more despair. But now, everyone firmly believed that the heavens had opened their eyes and blessed the pillar of heaven's mountains. That was why such a miracle had appeared. Everyone's hearts were filled with hope as they silently prayed that the pillar of heaven's mountains would overcome this crisis and regain its glory. Of course, none of the disciples dared to step into the dojo. They all watched from afar, afraid that they would blaspheme the gods and the heavens. An entire day passed. When night fell, the five-colored ball of light at the top of the sword steel exploded with a bang. Countless streaks of five-colored spiritual light fell from the sky like a torrential downpour before quickly dissipating. The five-colored spiritual light that lingered on the sword steel also abruptly withdrew. The multicolored light that had been shining on the surface of the 100-kilometer-wide dojo also quickly faded away. Everything returned to normal, and the scene of auspicious signs descending from the heavens disappeared. However, only Ji Tianxing knew that the five-colored spiritual light signified that he had succeeded. With the help of the heavenly dome formation and the sword of burial of heaven, he had successfully unleashed the secret technique of chaotic heaven and merged with heaven and earth. The boundless spiritual chi and dermic powers merged into the world. His breathing and aura were also connected with heaven and earth, becoming undetectable. At this moment, he was sitting quietly at the top of the sword steel. His expression was neither sad nor happy, and his eyes were deep and indifferent. However, no matter who looked at him, they would feel the boundless spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Looking up at him was like looking up at the vast sky, looking at the vast earth. In their hearts, there was only awe and admiration. If a martial arts expert released their divine sense to investigate his background, they would find that he was as vast as heaven and earth, infinitely vast and boundless. They would not be able to determine his strength, depth, and boundary. Huff! Ji Tianxing slowly opened his eyes and habitually exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, ending this cultivation session. Suddenly, dark clouds appeared in the sky above the pillar of heaven's mountains, and a shocking hurricane blew, causing the dark clouds to surge like waves. The sudden change of heaven and earth gave many disciples a shock, and a strong sense of fear and worry arose in their hearts. Ji Tianxing was also stunned for a moment, and then he could not help but laugh. Ha! Now that I have used the Armillary Heaven secret skill, I have merged with heaven and earth, and my every move is like the power of heaven and earth. No one can investigate my background, and no one can kill me except for the martial god. The heaven and earth is my incarnation, and unless someone can destroy the heaven and earth within 1,000 miles, I am invincible. After muttering a few words to himself, he stepped across the sky and landed below the sword steel. Burial of heaven, you preside over the operation of the firmament formation and continue to recover. He reminded Burial of heaven, and then quickly left the training hall and returned to the pillar of heaven's palace. After entering the secret chamber, he opened the space ring and took out the glazed treasure bottle. In the small bottle, there was the remnant soul of the white dragon god. He opened the bottle and used his divine sense to check the condition of the white dragon remnant soul. Although the remnant soul had swallowed a large amount of cultivation resources and was stronger than before, it was still very weak. However, the remnant soul was still very weak and had yet to regain consciousness. Ji Tianxing held the glazed treasure bottle and thought to himself, relying on those cultivation resources, no matter how much I have, it will be difficult to help the white dragon recover. Only a divine-level elixir or great formation can help him recover his strength quickly. Unfortunately, the firmament formation needs to protect the pillar of heaven's mountain and help Burial of heaven recover. If I want to help the white dragon recover, I can only rely on the power of the star divine furnace. After making up his mind, he went to the conference hall and took the longevity vine. Then, he took the longevity vine and the glazed treasure bottle through the secret passage in the secret chamber and landed in the star divine furnace at the bottom of the pillar of heaven's mountain. The light in the huge and empty star divine furnace was very dim. Only the torch-shaped platform in the middle was still lit with the star divine fire that was more than 6 meters tall. After the firmament formation was activated, the star divine furnace also benefited, and its power increased, and the star divine fire became more vigorous. Ji Tianxing observed for a moment, and then started to set up the formation. The white dragon's remnant soul was too weak, and it could not directly absorb the star divine fire to recover its strength. Therefore, Ji Tianxing wanted to set up a great formation in the divine furnace to help the white dragon recover its strength. Also, to be on the safe side, he would sacrifice the longevity vine to replenish the white dragon's remnant soul's life force. Ji Tianxing focused on setting up the formation and forgot about the passage of time. After half a day, he finally set up a great formation in the divine furnace. Then, he placed the glazed treasure bottle in the middle of the great formation and put the longevity vine into the glazed treasure bottle. The glazed treasure bottle lit up with a dark green brilliance, and the white dragon's remnant soul also started to absorb the longevity vine's life force. At the same time, after the great formation was activated, it gathered strands of star divine fire and guided them into the glazed treasure bottle. Under the protection of the longevity vine, the white dragon's remnant soul gradually devoured the star divine fire and quickly recovered its strength. After settling the white dragon's remnant soul, Ji Tianxing returned to the secret chamber and focused on cultivating. Chapter 1891. A day and a night had passed. Ji Tianxing's dermic powers had reached the peak state, and he stopped cultivating. There was a strong feeling in his divine soul. The third heavenly tribulation would descend today. To the current Ji Tianxing, the heavenly tribulation was no longer a dangerous thing. He only needed to go through the motions. After all, his true strength had reached the peak of the tribulation stage. Ordinary tribulation stage powerhouses needed to cultivate for hundreds of years before they could undergo the next heavenly tribulation. And he only needed 3 to 5 months, or even less. Fortunately, I am now at the pillar of heaven's mountains and not on the Luotian mountain. Otherwise, I would definitely be treated as a monster if I were to undergo the third heavenly tribulation in just 2 to 3 months. Ji Tianxing thought so in his heart, and his lips curled into an inexplicable smile. He got up and left the secret room and walked to the training hall outside the pillar of heaven's mountains palace. It was early in the morning. The sky was clear and the sun was slowly rising. Thousands of miles of sunlight scattered on the mountain peak, reflecting the surrounding white clouds, making the pillar of heaven's mountains palace look magnificent, like a fairyland. However, when Ji Tianxing walked to the center of the training hall, the wind and clouds were surging. Endless gray clouds gathered from all directions, forming a thick layer of clouds above the pillar of heaven's mountains palace. The morning sun was covered, and the world became dark. The wind was raging and whistling, and the endless gray clouds gathered quickly, spinning rapidly to form a vortex. Many disciples were practicing in the morning or adjusting their breathing. Suddenly seeing this scene, everyone looked up at the sky, revealing deep worry and doubt. Not long after, the gray clouds in the sky formed a huge black vortex, faintly flickering with the brilliance of lightning. At this moment, everyone came to a realization and burst into discussion. So, it's the tribulation cloud. Someone is going to undergo the heavenly tribulation. Strange. Who is going to undergo the heavenly tribulation in the training hall? Why not go to the back mountain? Yes, the training hall is the sacred ground of our sect. How can that person undergo the heavenly tribulation here? What if the heavenly tribulation destroys the training hall? I haven't heard of any senior brother or senior sister undergoing the heavenly tribulation recently. Who is going to undergo the heavenly tribulation? Let's go and see what is going on. Many disciples and deacons rushed to the dojo to find out what was going on. A while later, more than 10 disciples and deacons had gathered at the edge of the dojo. Everyone gathered in groups of 3 to 5 to observe the situation in the training hall and whispered to each other. He saw Ji Tianxing, who was dressed in a white robe, sitting under the sword steel in the middle of the training hall. His eyes were closed as he silently cultivated. No matter how dark the sky was or how violent the wind was, he remained unmoved with an indifferent expression. Who is that white-robed young man? Why haven't I seen it before? Yes, that young master looks very holy. He doesn't seem to be a disciple of our sect. How strange. A stranger actually managed to barge into our sect and even dares to undergo tribulation in the dojo? No, we seem to have seen that young master before. The day before yesterday, when a miracle appeared in the heavenly dojo and the auspicious sign descended from the heavens, that white-robed young master seemed to be there. Many disciples and deacons were discussing Ji Tianxing's identity and background. At this time, Ji Bai and Shohei rushed to the scene, and everyone made way. Shohei observed for a moment and then explained to everyone, don't make wild guesses. That white-robed young man is young Master Ji, the successor of our sect's founder, Kenshin. A few days ago, the great immortal personally wrote a letter to invite young Master Ji to help our sect through this difficult time. Hearing her say this, everyone suddenly realized. At this moment, the vortex of tribulation clouds high in the sky sped up and began to descend heavenly thunder. Boom! With a shocking sound of thunder, 300-meter-long pillars of lightning fiercely blasted towards Ji Tianxing. The 3 pillars of lightning were purple, blue, and gold. They contained the power of different attributes, and their power was very violent. Ji Tianxing sat motionless. Dazzling golden light gushed out of his body and formed a huge vortex above his head. The 3 pillars of lightning all blasted into the golden vortex, but they were swallowed without a trace. They couldn't hurt him at all. Seeing this scene, the disciples and deacons at the edge of the square all revealed a look of horror and exclaimed, "Oh my God, what kind of heavenly tribulation is this? Why did 3 heavenly thunders descend at once? I've lived for more than 200 years, and I've never seen 3 heavenly thunders. This is too strange. It's unbelievable." Young Master Ji didn't use any technique to resist and even swallowed the 3 heavenly thunders. As expected of the founder's successor, his heavenly tribulation is so strange, and his method of tribulation is also unimaginable. Just as everyone was full of amazement and whispering to each other, the second heavenly thunder descended. Boom! This time, 6 heavenly thunders struck out from the vortex of tribulation clouds. They were divided into 3 colors, and their power was 3 times stronger than before. However, Ji Tianxing still didn't move and sat calmly under the sword steel. The 6 heavenly thunders blasted into the golden vortex and were swallowed in the blink of an eye. Not long after, the 3rd heavenly thunder descended. This time, there were 12 pillars of lightning, and their power was even stronger. The dazzling lightning tore through the dusky sky and illuminated the entire mountain peak. The violent and terrifying power enveloped the entire training hall. However, the 12 heavenly thunders couldn't break the golden vortex and were still swallowed by Ji Tianxing. The disciples and deacons standing at the edge of the training hall witnessed this scene with their own eyes, and they were incomparably shocked. Everyone's blood was boiling, and they were dazzled by the scene. They were incomparably excited. This heavenly tribulation was unprecedented, and it was an eye-opener for everyone. They could only call it a miracle. After the 3 heavenly thunders, the vortex of tribulation clouds changed, and a crimson color emerged from the black clouds. Boom! Following an earth-shattering explosion, 24 lightning pillars struck out from the vortex of tribulation clouds and struck towards Ji Tianxing. Each lightning pillar was composed of 4 colors, and their power was 4 times stronger than before. Moreover, The 24 lightning pillars were arranged in a special position, forming some kind of heavenly Tao formation that contained unparalleled divine power. Ji Tianxing stood up and formed a sword seal with both hands. He struck out 48 sword beams into the sky. Swish, swish, swish. 48 gigantic golden swords over 1,000 feet long also formed a mysterious formation and blasted towards the 24 heavenly thunders. Bam, bam, bam. The two collided, and a series of earth-shattering explosions erupted. All the sword beams shattered, and the lightning pillars also collapsed and dissipated. The golden light fragments and lightning arcs floated in the sky for a long time before disappearing. Next, the fifth and sixth heavenly thunders descended one after another. Within the vortex of tribulation clouds, 48 and 96 heavenly thunders struck down respectively. Such a large number of heavenly thunders struck down like a rain of arrows, and their power was so powerful that it could destroy the world. Countless disciples and deacons watched with trepidation, worry, and reverence. However, Ji Tianxing executed a sword Tao secret technique with all his might, releasing sword beams that filled the sky and destroyed the lightning pillars. Chapter 1892. The 6 heavenly tribulations had passed. The tribulation cloud vortex changed again and was dyed with a layer of blood. Obviously, the 7th heavenly tribulation, the inner demon tribulation, was about to arrive. Ji Tianxing straightened his clothes and looked up at the tribulation cloud vortex in the sky with a smile on his face. The inner demon tribulation was no longer dangerous for him. It would only help him recover more soul memories. Boom! Amidst the loud noise, a blood-red heavenly lightning struck down and hit him hard. However, there was no apocalyptic scene. Endless dark red bloodlight wrapped around Ji Tianxing, forming a huge blood-red light ball that floated in the sky. His soul entered the illusion and began to experience the inner demon tribulation. The people at the edge of the training hall were full of doubts and shock as they discussed. It was the first time for many people to see the inner demon tribulation, and it was the first time for them to see someone who could trigger 7 heavenly lightning bolts. After Ji Bai and Shohei's explanation, everyone understood what was going on. They were immediately amazed, and their hearts were filled with admiration and anticipation. About an hour later, Ji Tianxing finally resolved the inner demon tribulation. The blood-red light ball collapsed, and the dark red blood light dissipated. He recovered a part of his soul memories, and his aura became even more mysterious and ethereal. Not long after, the 8th heavenly lightning, the wind and fire tribulation, descended. In the tribulation cloud vortex, with a radius of 100 miles, a lightning pillar that was thousands of feet long and looked like a divine dragon descended. Boom! The 5-colored pillar of lightning struck Ji Tianxing with a loud bang, turning into a monstrous thunder fire that engulfed him. The power of the divine lightning was extremely terrifying, enough to destroy the entire pillar of heaven's mountains. However, the power of the divine lightning was only within 100 miles and would not spread outside the training hall. Ji Tianxing was wrapped in the 5-colored lightning fire and floated in the sky. He opened his arms and looked up at the sky. There were purple, blue, gold, and red heavenly lightning that surrounded his body and kept drilling into his head. There was a blazing white 9 heavens astral wind that wrapped around his body, cutting and tearing his flesh and blood apart. There was also a mysterious black flame that drilled into his body from his hands and feet, burning his blood and bone marrow. Even his internal organs and head were being burned by the mysterious black flames and lightning. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing was using the great tribulation of wind and fire to temper his body. This process was extremely painful and dangerous, but he was duty-bound and persevered with his extraordinary willpower. Of course, he had used the great tribulation of wind and fire to temper himself before. With enough experience, his physical body was also very strong. Now that he was tempering again, the pain he felt was greatly reduced, and The tempering process was very smooth. Moreover, after he used the Armillary Heaven secret technique, he could already transform into heaven and earth. His safety was absolutely guaranteed. 15 minutes later, the lightning, fire, and wind that enveloped his entire body gradually disappeared. Obviously, he had succeeded. His entire body flickered with a faint golden light as he emitted an aura of righteousness, causing everyone around the training ground to involuntarily prostrate themselves in worship. Although everyone was inexperienced and didn't understand what he had done and experienced, they still didn't understand. However, everyone knew that he had successfully passed the 8th tribulation. Since ancient times, martial artists who were able to attract 8 heavenly tribulations were at least able to become martial gods. As long as one wasn't a fool, they would know that this young Master G was definitely an unparalleled genius. Soon, the 9th tribulation lightning struck again. From the tribulation cloud whirlpool that was 100 miles in circumference, a 3,000-meter long pillar of lightning that was as white as snow struck down. Kaboom! The strange snow-white lightning struck Ji Tianxing and turned into a ball of white light that was as big as a palace, enveloping him. His body instantly stiffened and stopped in midair, unable to move an inch. The snow-white ball of light enveloped him and floated silently in the sky. Many disciples and deacons were pleasantly surprised to see this scene. They whispered to each other, not knowing what was going on. Heavens! Young Master G actually attracted 9 heavenly tribulations. Since ancient times, only our ancestral master has been able to attract 9 heavenly tribulations. Now, there's another person, young Master G. As expected of our ancestral master's successor, this young Master G didn't embarrass our ancestral master. He's definitely the #1 genius in the world. I hope young Master G can inherit our ancestral master's ultimate technique and restore our ancestral master's glory. This is really strange. Why is this tribulation so strange? A snow-white ball of light? The will of the heavenly Tao is not something that ordinary people like us can guess. Don't make wild guesses. Not only were the disciples and deacons confused, even Ji Bai and Shohei, who followed Ji Tianxing, had never seen this kind of tribulation before. Only Ji Tianxing knew that this tribulation was a special test given to him by the heavenly Tao. Just like the last tribulation, the last stage of the 6 paths of reincarnation tribulation, it could be said that this was a tribulation formed by the heavenly Tao against him. It could also be seen as a special care and test from the heavenly Tao. His soul was trapped in the tribulation and was lost in thousands of space-time. All around him was a pitch-black void, as well as all kinds of spatial barriers and gaps. Tens of thousands of large and small spaces were crowded in the void in an incomparably chaotic manner, waiting for him to travel and explore. Every space was a different world. Not only did they have different appearances, but even time was chaotic, and he was lost in the chaotic space-time. He had to find the right path and return to the original point in order to survive this tribulation. Otherwise, his soul would be lost in the chaotic space-time and would never be able to wake up. Ji Tianxing was in the void. He was pulled by the void storm and the black hole, and he couldn't help but travel through 30 layers of space-time. He had completely lost his direction and couldn't find the origin. But he quickly calmed down and used the divine mystic technique to observe the surrounding space-time. His divine mystic technique originated from the famous Golden Dragon King in the Dragon Realm. A pair of dragon gods' eyes could see through all the worlds and see through all illusions and disguises. Even though Ji Tianxing wasn't a dragon, after cultivating the divine mystic technique, he only had 60% of the Golden Dragon King's mastery. But that was enough. Now that he was using the divine mystic technique, he didn't need to see through all the worlds. He only needed to see through thousands of layers of space-time. About a day later, or a few months later, he finally saw through the surrounding space-time and noticed some clues. Then, he used another secret technique, Heavenly Dragon's 7 Steps. This was a divine footwork that he created by combining the dragon race's secret technique. In the upper realm, It was also a divine technique that was worshipped by thousands of gods. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing took a step forward and passed through 3 layers of space-time, appearing on the other side of the void. He took another step forward and passed through 5 layers of space-time, including a few layers of folded space, and appeared in the void even further away. After 7 consecutive steps, he had quickly passed through more than 100 layers of space-time without any delay, nor was he affected by the chaotic space-time. Finally, he appeared in a pitch-black void. The void storm and black hole around him had disappeared. Not far in front of him, a beam of light appeared. It was like a cold star. He walked over and soon arrived at the light. He saw a blazing white door of light. After crossing the door of light, he left the chaotic space-time, and his soul returned to his body. Chapter 1893. The dazzling white light that enveloped Ji Tianqing quickly collapsed and dissipated. The tribulation cloud vortex in the sky also shattered and dissipated, turning into a large ball of sacred golden light. Swoosh! The golden light poured down like a flood and enveloped his body. He opened his arms and accepted the baptism calmly, wantonly devouring the sacred golden light. After a full 100 breaths, he finally finished devouring the golden light. His magic power surged crazily. His physical body and soul were also strengthened. Now he had reached the 3rd level of the tribulation stage, and his strength was 5 times stronger than before. Everything returned to normal. The gray clouds above the pillar of heaven's mountains dispersed, and the sky became clear again. The sun shone down golden light again. The disciples and deacons around the training hall cheered excitedly after witnessing Ji Tianqing pass through the 9 heavenly tribulations. This unprecedented heavenly tribulation shocked everyone, and it was enough to make them remember it for the rest of their lives. The one who shocked and worshipped the most was still Ji Tianqing. Not only could he attract the 9 heavenly tribulations, but he could also easily dissolve them. He was not injured from the beginning to the end. He could pass through the tribulation so easily. He was simply a god. This descendant of Kenshin would definitely create a miracle and bring hope to the pillar of heaven's mountains. The haze and despair in everyone's hearts were swept away. They looked forward to Ji Tianqing creating glory again and reproducing the power of Kenshin in the past. Ji Tianqing did not stay. After the tribulation, he left the training hall and returned to the pillar of heaven's mountains palace. He meditated in the secret chamber, stabilized his martial arts foundation, and practiced some secret techniques. As he passed through the 3rd heavenly tribulation, he recovered more and more soul memories, and the secret techniques he mastered became more and more vast. It was no exaggeration to say that there were at least 5,000 secret techniques above the sage level in his memory, and most of them were divine techniques from the upper realm. As long as he could use these secret techniques well, he would not only be invincible below the martial sage level, but he could even fight against martial sages. Next, I'll wait for the 7 sects and 14 factions to walk into the trap. After I subdue the 7 sects and 14 factions and unify the area around the pillar of heaven's mountains, I'll be able to repair the 108 mountains and reactivate the 2 divine arrays. While meditating and adjusting his breath, Ji Tianqing silently calculated in his heart. What he wanted to do the most was to reactivate the 2 formations and restore the pillar of heaven's mountains to its former glory. The pillar of heaven's mountains had once again become a martial Tao holy land. Only then could he continue with his plan and let the pillar of heaven's mountains grow stronger. In the future, he would not attach himself to any divine kingdom. He wanted the pillar of heaven's mountains to regain its former glory and become the 4th great power, enough to contend against the Dark North Mountain. He had never forgotten that the ancestral devil god was his greatest enemy. The battle between the 2 of them had yet to truly begin. 3 days passed in a flash. Early in the morning, the sun had just risen and the pillar of heaven's mountains was peaceful. Ji Tianqing was meditating in a secret chamber, cultivating the universe creator. Suddenly, Ji Bai's voice sounded from outside the door. "Master, I have important news." Ji Tianxing heard his deep and dignified voice and knew that it was an important matter. He ended his cultivation and waved his hand to open the door to the secret chamber. Ji Bai quickly entered and reported, "Master, our sect scouts have just sent news that the 3 sects and 6 factions of the East have gathered a large number of experts and are rushing towards the Pillar of Heaven's mountains." Ji Tianxing slightly frowned and asked in a dignified tone, "How many people do the 3 sects and 6 factions have, and where are they now?" Ji Bai replied truthfully, "According to the scouts, they have around 600 to 700 people and are rushing over on 9 flying boats. They have already passed the East Mountain and will reach the Pillar of Heaven's mountains in at most 10 hours. "What?" Ji Tianxing frowned and asked in a deep voice. "The 3 sects and 6 factions only receive the news after passing the East Mountain? Didn't our sect have spies near the Battle Dragon sect?" "This." Ji Bai hesitated for a moment, and then lowered his head to explain, "The 2 spies that our sect placed in the Battle Dragon sect were discovered. They have already rebelled and joined the Battle Dragon sect." Ji Tianxing was startled for a moment, and then his mouth hooked up into a cold smile. No wonder. He got up and left the throne and walked towards the door of the secret chamber. At the same time, he asked Ji Bai, "Does Huanglong know the news?" Ji Bai replied respectfully, "The scouts have already reported to the Great Immortal. I believe that after the Great Immortal receives the news, he will definitely gather everyone in the main hall for a discussion." Ji Tianxing did not say anything else and brought Ji Bai to the main hall. When the 2 of them entered the main hall, there were already many people gathered in the main hall. There was the Huanglong Taoist, the great elder Nye Tianxin, and 4 other elders. Everyone had already received the news and were discussing with a serious expression on their faces as they discussed countermeasures. Seeing Ji Tianxing's arrival, everyone let out a sigh of relief. They looked towards him and respectfully bowed. "Welcome, Master. Welcome, martial ancestor." Everyone stood respectfully in the main hall and looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of expectation. Everyone was imagining that he must have already prepared a countermeasure. Huanglong Taoist was the first to speak and asked, "Master, the people from the Battle Dragon sect, Seeking Heaven sect and Water Mirror sect are already impatient and are rushing over with murderous intent. In at most 10 hours, the flying boats from the 3 sects and 6 schools will arrive at the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Master, how should we deal with them?" Ji Tianxing looked at him and calmly asked, "How are the results of your secluded cultivation these few days?" Huanglong Taoist did not hide and answered truthfully, "Master, after Disciple comprehended the perfect sword scripture, Disciple was enlightened and my sword cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. Now, Disciple can already use 16 swords." Ji Tianxing nodded with a gratified expression and asked, "The 7 sects and 14 schools are divided into 2 groups and both want to annex the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Now that the 3 sects of the East have taken the lead, the 4 sects of the West must have received the news as well. Have they made any moves?" Huanglong Taoist's expression froze, and he lowered his head in shame. "Master, the spy that Disciple planted in the Boundless sect has been executed after his identity was exposed. Now, we can't monitor the Boundless sect's movements and can only wait for news from the scouts." Ji Tianxing frowned and said expressionlessly, "By the time the scouts discover them, they will already be on their way to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains." Huanglong Taoist hurriedly apologized and said with a voice full of self-blame, "Master, please don't be angry. This disciple didn't think it through. This disciple will send more people now." Without waiting for him to finish, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "It's useless to send spies now. When the 4 sects of the West hear the news, they will definitely take the opportunity to interfere and reap the benefits. If the 4 sects of the West come, it'll be good too. We can deal with them all together." Huanglong Taoist's eyes lit up and he asked expectantly, "Master, looks like you already have a foolproof plan to wipe out the 7 sects and 14 schools. Wipe them out." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said in a playful tone, "Don't forget, the 7 sects and 14 schools are our subjects. We only need to subdue them. Why we need to wipe them out?" Chapter 1894. Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, everyone immediately understood. He wanted to subdue the 7 sects and 14 factions, not exterminate them. The Huanglong Taoist and several elders frowned. They were a little nervous and doubtful, unable to believe it. Master, there are as many as 600 to 700 people from the 3 sects of the East, and they're all elite disciples and experts. Our sect only has 200 people. How can we fight against the 3 sects and 4 factions? How can we subdue them? The Huanglong Taoist frowned anxiously and advised Ji Tianxing. There are still a few hours before the 3 sects of the East arrive at the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Why don't we make arrangements before they arrive? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said with a dignified expression, "There's no need. I've already made arrangements. We just need to wait." Since he insisted on his opinion, the Huanglong Taoist did not say anything, and the elders did not dare to object. Everyone waited patiently in the conference hall. Only Ji Tianxing looked indifferent. He leaned on the throne and closed his eyes to rest. The elders were full of worry. Their eyes were solemn and nervous. Unknowingly, 10 hours had passed. It was evening. The golden sun set in the sky, sprinkling endless rays of light on the sea of clouds. At this moment, a huge 5-colored light ribbon cut through the sky and sped over from the east. 9 flying boats of different sizes were wrapped in the colorful light. The golden flying boat flying at the front was the largest. It was 100 feet long and more than 200 feet wide. It was completely golden. 2 huge golden dragon patterns were carved on the body of the flying boat. They were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. This was the flying boat of the Battle Dragon sect. It was a low-grade, saint-level Dharma treasure. It had a strong defense and was extremely fast. The 2 flying boats following closely behind the Battle Dragon sect were also more than 800 feet long. The carvings were very exquisite and beautiful. These 2 blue flying boats were the flying boats of the Seeking Heaven sect and the Water Mirror sect. They were supreme-grade tribulation Dharma treasures. Further behind, there were 6 smaller flying boats. They were arranged in 2 rows. Each flying boat was 500 feet long. Although they were considered exquisite, they could not be compared to the flying boats of the 3 sects. These were the flying boats of the 6 sects. They were of lower grades and weaker power. The 6 sects belonged to the 3 sects. They could only follow orders. After a while, the 9 flying boats flew over the sky and arrived outside the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. The 9 flying boats lined up in a row and stopped 1,000 feet away from the peak of the mountain, floating in mid-air. Swoosh, swoosh. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Swoosh, swoosh. Swoosh, swoosh. In just a few breaths, more than 20 people had gathered together, and all of them were powerhouses in the crossing calamity realm. The leader of the tribulation heaven, swoosh, swoosh. Swoosh, swoosh. Swoosh, swoosh. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. This person was tall and sturdy, and his white hair was tied into a ponytail. He wore a large purple cloak with a phoenix pattern on it, and his entire body emitted an arrogant and domineering aura. Tutut is swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. SW1 of them swoosh. Swoosh. Swoosh, whoosh. He was the sect master of the Battle Dragon sect, the martial sage Tang Zhanlong. The 2 old men standing behind him also had a head full of white hair. Their sideburns were like frost, and their deep sunken eyes contained experience and wisdom. They were the sect masters of the Water Mirror sect and the Heaven-Seeking sect. Both of them had reached the 8th level of the Tribulation realm. Among the 6 experts, there were middle-aged men and white-haired old men. They were the sect masters of the 6 sects. These 9 experts were the leaders of the 3 sects and 6 schools. Tang Zhanlong, the martial sage, was the leader. The dozen or so tribulation heaven swoosh, 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 swoosh. They were the guardians and elders of the 3 sects and 6 schools. Tang Zhanlong stood in the sky and looked down at the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. He observed quietly, although the sky was clear and nothing could be seen. However, he noticed that something was wrong and frowned. Strange. It is said that the protective array of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains was personally set up by Kenshin in the past. That protective mountain array was closed several hundred years ago. Why is it open again now? Hearing Tang Zhanlong's reminder, the sect masters of the Water Mirror sect and the Heaven-Seeking sect released their divine senses. Soon, they found that there was an invisible light shield between heaven and earth that protected the entire pillar of heaven's mountains. The two sect masters also frowned and began to discuss with a solemn expression. It is said that the protective array set up by Kenshin is the same as the Great Array of the 108 Peaks. They are both God-level Great Arrays. If the protective array of the heavens mountains is really opened, that invisible light shield, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to break it. Yes, if we are blocked by the protective array of the heavens mountains, we can't even enter the pillar of heaven's mountains. How can we occupy the pillar of heaven's mountains? Hearing this, the sect masters of the six sects frowned and looked worried. Tang Zhanlong frowned and slowly raised his right hand. He clenched his 5 fingers into a fist and punched the pillar of heaven's mountains with all his strength. A golden light fist as large as a hill, carrying a terrifying impact force, fiercely hit the invisible light shield. Bang! The golden light fist hit the invisible light shield and exploded with an earth-shattering sound that spread over a radius of 100 miles. The fist light shattered with a loud bang, turning into golden fragments that covered the sky and covered the earth, spreading out in all directions like a torrential downpour. In the originally empty sky, a huge 5-colored light shield also appeared. It had a radius of a few hundred miles and enveloped the entire pillar of heaven's mountains. Although the 5-colored light shield was not thick, like a layer of translucent bubbles, its defensive power was extremely strong. That devastating punch had no effect on the defensive light barrier at all. It didn't even cause a single ripple on it. Tang Zhanlong's face immediately turned gloomy and his eyes were surging with a cold light. The 2 sect leaders and the 6 sect leaders were also whispering to each other with grave expressions as they discussed countermeasures. 10 breaths passed. There was still no movement on the pillar of heaven's mountains. Even the patrolling guards were nowhere to be seen. No one came to check the situation at all. Tang Zhanlong could not help but sneer. They are actually cowards? The dignified pillar of heaven's mountains has fallen to such a state. It seems that they are really at the end of their rope. They don't have the courage to fight us head on. In that case, I'd like to see how long they can hold on. He made up his mind and waved his wide robe sleeves. He ordered in a deep voice, "All disciples of the 3 sects and 6 schools, listen to my order. Immediately control the warships and form a battle formation. Attack the mountain protection array with all your strength." As his majestic voice spread out, the more than 600 disciples on the 9 flying boats all moved. Swish, 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 swish. The flying ships lit up and began to change. They stretched out wide wings. The 9 flying ships connected together and immediately became a huge war fortress that could accommodate 2,000 to 3,000 people. Teams of masters and disciples jumped out of the flying ships and formed a battle formation on the wide wings. They joined forces to cast spells. Hundreds of disciples joined forces to cast spells and released thousands of fireballs, bombs, and sword shadows. They poured down on the pillar of heaven's mountains like a heavy downpour.